Good evening. I call the October 10th, 2007 meeting of the Los Gatos Planning Commission to order. I'm Joanne Talasfor. I'm chairman of the Planning Commission, and I and my fellow commissioners welcome you here tonight. The Planning Commission is composed of citizens appointed by the Town Council to review planning and development issues and to make decisions regarding those issues and recommendations to the Town Council regarding land use matters for both commercial and residential matters. And as we hear discussion tonight, we will consider each proposal and evaluate how it supports and enhances the high quality of life we enjoy here in Los Gatos. Our actions are guided by the town's general plan policies, zoning codes, and other standards and guidelines that have been adopted by the Town Council. And a reminder from us to please silence your cell phones if you have them with you tonight. Mr. Lortz, would you please take roll?
Commissioner Sayok.
Here.
Commissioner Rice.
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Machichi.
Here.
Commissioner Bourgeois.
Here.
Vice Chair Kane.
Here.
And Chair Talasfor.
Here. Thank you very much. And with that, Commissioner King, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Members of the audience, as is your right, there'll be time for you to have verbal communication. And when you do, or if you decide to, you'll have two opportunities to speak. That is before the public hearing is open, and that would be, you'll have 3 minutes before this public hearing to address anything that's not on the agenda tonight. The planning commissioners are not allowed to address any of your issues, though, at that time. Please fill out a speaker card. You'll find them in front of the seats that you're sitting in, and then hand it to the clerk to my left, and she will hand it to me. What I'm going to need now, before we do this, is I need the approval of minutes of September 12th. Commissioners, good evening.
I'll move approval.
Okay, I have a first. What do we have here? Commissioner, thank you. A motion and a second by Commissioner Kane and Commissioner Rice. Thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
It's approved. Thank you. And let's move on to written communications. We have one item, and it is a letter received October 5th from residents of Hannah-Sackett, Twin Oaks Tract neighborhood town of Los Gatos, and no action is required. We do also have requested continuances, which is item number 1, 21 Mariposa Avenue for a minor residential application MR-06-30. Requested continuance to October 24th, 2007. This is the third continuance request. Mr. Lortz, is there anything we need to know about the continuance?
It's just a straight outright continuance, and it is requested to be continued to October 24th.
Commissioners, do we have questions, or
Staff is okay with it?
staff is okay with it? Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Second.
Do I have a second by Commissioner Bourgeois? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay, thank you. We have subcommittee reports tonight. I think we have two. Let's see, we had the general plan meeting. Commissioner Bourgeois, do you want to give that report?
Thank you. Yes, the General Plan Committee meeting met 2 weeks ago, I believe, and we discussed a property at the corner of Town Terrace and University Avenue. It's currently zoned high density. It also has an historic home on it, and what was before us was a zone change to zone it to medium density and to allow a rotation of the historic home and the placement of 2 more single-family homes on that property and that request passed general plan at a vote of 5-1.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, Commissioners, on that? Thank you, Commissioner Bourgeois. And Historic Preservation Committee, and Commissioner Michichi, I think you're giving that report.
Last month, discussed sorry about that. Discussed 5 or 6 items. Majority of them were prehistoric type homes that had been built on, and we couldn't really find the basic historic portion of them anymore, and which is a continuing issue there. The biggest one we talked about was 115 North Santa Cruz Avenue, which is the old Chart House, and they're planning on putting 2 buildings and it'll be coming before us, I think, is the next step. We approved it to the next step with comments, and you'll see those comments, I'm sure, when the report comes out.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, Commissioners? Thank you very much, Commissioner Michichi. Perfect. Okay, now is the time for our verbal communications from the audience. And when I call your name, please come to the podium. In fact, this would address all speakers tonight. State your name and speak into the mic or adjust the mic so you can speak into it. And my first speaker is Citizen Ray.
Understand it? Get ready. I'd like a little honesty and truth in the public meeting, okay? Yes. First off, I want to say, looking back at the last meeting, it was truly difficult. Truly difficult. And as far as I'm concerned, the basic reason was the agenda was overcrowded, way overcrowded. And we all suffered, okay? And I hated to see our dear friend, Ms. California here, put through that grill, okay? So tonight we have a much more reasonable agenda, and I know things are going to go beautifully for Ms. Talafor and all the rest of us, okay? Also, I want to point out that there was some discussion by certain members of the Planning Commission about cutting off public comment, even though the agenda item was to be the same, and public hearings were to go forward, one-sided public hearings. And I want to tell you, that is totally against the law. Totally against the Brown Act. And how do I know? Because some 10 years ago, 3 of us in the city of Aranda took the city of Aranda to court for exactly the same reason, shutting out the ability of the public to comment at an agendized meeting, a Brown Act meeting. And we won that court decision. We won 3 permanent Brown Act injunctions, which stipulated that we, the people, would have a chance at every public meeting that's a Brown Act meeting to speak to every item on the agenda. Period. End of story. The decision was published and made case law. Our attorney, pro bono attorney, won $40,000 in a court judgment for a 2-day trial. It was a beautiful happening in Aranda for we the people. And of course, being a published item, being case law, it affects every jurisdiction in California that falls under the Brown Act, okay? So feel good, but let's all get together and understand what the law is, okay? Because I don't want to have to go to the people's attorney, the district attorney, and file a complaint against one of my fellow esteemed citizens on the Planning Commission, including Michichi. Thank you.
Thank you, Citizen Ray. Our next speaker during verbal communications is David Kreitz.
My name is Dave Kreitz at 15 900 Roshan Terrace in Los Gatos. I wanted to do two things. One is I wanted to correct the August 22nd record, and the second is to ask a procedural question that maybe we can't answer right here. At the August 22nd Planning Commission meeting, Aaron Garner stated that his Ross Creek project of development was used as a model during the creation of the current guidelines and standards for land use near streams. He said that this project was used as a model for environmental sensitivity and community benefit, and Mr. Garner was misrepresenting the situation. I have an email here, if you all would be interested in receiving it, from one of the officials involved in the Water Resource Protection Collaborative saying that the Ross Creek Development Project, quote, was not used as a model for the creation of the guidelines and standards, as claimed. In fact, the official also expressed concern that the use of the project as a case study, quote, might lead people to falsely believe that the proposed project somehow is consistent with all of the guidelines and standards. In fact, the Ross Creek subdevelopment could have been the model for what to avoid. Section 6K of the Guidelines and Standards says subdevelopments with houses backing up to the creek, quote, become a detriment to the area instead of an asset. So second, I'd like to ask a procedural question. The Ross Creek project has been modified since the last public hearing. And my question is, does the Planning Commission intend to reopen the public hearing for comment on the changes before voting on the project? I'd like the opportunity to explain why I continue to object to the adoption of a mitigated negative declaration for that project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone like the email?
If I may, members of the commission,
Thank
as
you.
you know, based on your prior direction, and we have Mr. Bourgeois here at the table, and he's actually recused on the Ross Creek project, but it's okay. This is public verbal communications, but the commission's address or direction was that the public hearing was being continued for a very limited purpose, and that was to hear receive any written response from the applicant to the report that was filed at the time of the meeting last time, and that the applicant had not had an opportunity to see or respond to, and to take any response from staff, any clarifications, additional information, again, limited to that report that was filed. The public hearing was otherwise closed. The speaker, I would interpret what the speaker is doing is providing additional evidence. We have not received any additional evidence other than that limited evidence that I've referred to. So I would advise the commission that unless you are reopening the public hearing for all purposes, that additional evidence is not received and should not be considered with regard to your decision making.
Would that also include the email?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioners, let's put it away. Thank you.
Let me just add one other additional point for the record and for any member of the audience. The Ross Creek project cannot be approved without this matter going to public hearing before the town council. So there will be another opportunity in another public hearing to present any and all evidence, including additional evidence, that members of the public may wish to present regarding this project.
Thank you, Mr. Korb. It's very unusual since the public forum is for items not on the agenda. Thank you. With that, we have nothing on the consent calendar, Commissioners, and so I will open the continued public hearing. And if you are going to be a speaker at this time, remember that you come to the podium, you state your name and your address and for the records, and then you adjust the mic. As an applicant, you will have up to 5 minutes to make any comments that you feel would be helpful at this time for the commission. And as an interested party, you'll have up to 3 minutes to come up after the applicant introduces his project. So with that, I would like to open up the public hearing for, continued public hearing for item number 1, which is 275, actually, item number 2, excuse me, 275 Los Gatos Saratoga Road. It's continued from August 8th and August 22nd, 2007. It's architecture and site application S-07-158, requesting approval to construct a new commercial building on property zoned C-2, APN 510-14-076. Property owner is Chevron USA Incorporated, and the applicant is Chris Blackwell. And I do have a card here for Chris Blackwell, I believe. No, I don't. Chris, would you, Mr. Blackwell, would you come to the, or who is presenting tonight? The applicant is here. Okay, thank you.
Chris Spalding, architect,
Okay.
801 Chameleon Street, Berkeley. I'll just synopsize the changes we made in reaction to the comments from the commission and the neighbors. We completely redesigned the building and changed its style, removed the tower, removed the storefronts, made it more of an office building, less of a retail. Added sloped roofs and gables to reduce the bulk, and added the covered pedestrian walkway. We added a bunch of landscaping. We added street trees on the Massal side, added a symbolic gate, hedge, and additional trees on the Massal side. We added additional trees between the building and the Shell station, added additional trees along the fence line to the residences, and changed the center of the parking lot to be interlocking pavers instead of all asphalt. And that was the changes we made. We left the basic arrangement of the improvements the way we had originally proposed, because we still feel that's the best arrangement for the buildings. And I'll take questions if you have any.
Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions? Commissioner Kane?
Mr. Spalding, thank you for the redesign, and thank you for involving the neighborhood in the revision. The new building has titles of potential companies that may be potential occupants that may be moving in. And we've talked a lot about the traffic on that corner. Do you have, or can you put an accent grave on getting professional tenants versus retail? Did you do the plumbing supply building on?
Yes, I did, yeah.
I remember you came to us with a plumbing supply sign on the preliminary design.
That's because that was a tenant that was looking at that building already.
Do you already have 3 such tenants looking at that building?
I don't believe so.
What could you do about getting 3 such tenants to? My concern is...
I'm probably not the one to talk to who the tenants might be, but...
My concern, and I'll express it later, is also is the traffic. And retail adds revenue to the town, but it's already a difficult corner. Mr. Lortz told me tonight that the neighborhood has requested, and the town is participating in a traffic calming study, which is very good news. I live in a neighborhood where that helped out significantly. But to bring in 3 retails with a limited number of parking, and we know about the U-turns and how hard it is to get in there, I would simply suggest that we do all we can to have the tenants be professional.
Well, architecturally, all I can say about that is that the building we changed the style, so it's more of a professional office type building than a retail without the storefronts. And that's all I can do architecturally. They can speak to the getting tenants.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, do we have any other questions? Commissioner Bourgeois?
I have a couple questions, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would like...
I do not mind.
I would like your take on how the neighborhood meeting went and subsequent discussions about the neighborhood opinion of the redesign.
I think they went well, and they are here and are going to speak, so you can ask them yourselves.
Well, I figured they're going to speak and give us their perspective. I'd like to hear your side of that as
I
well.
think what we came up with here was mutually agreeable for everybody.
Great, thank you. And my second question is on the landscaping. I'm really happy to see the increase in the landscaping and kind of the general layout. The town's recently, in the past couple years, redone their recommended tree list. And we generally like to not encourage London plane tree. I understand why it's used at this site, so I don't like, for continuity in the street tree scene, I understand that. But since this is kind of a gateway to the almond grove, did you consider using an almond, like a specimen almond or some accent almonds? Just seems
No,
like
we just went, that's what Masal had as a street tree, so we decided that that would be the appropriate street tree. We didn't think of all.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I do have a question, too. I noticed that it's a small one, but I noticed there was a 1-foot difference between the original plan. The building was I think the ridge line was at 20 feet, and now it's at 21.
The what?
The ridge line on the original building that you brought was 20 feet, and now this one is 21. Can you explain that, what the difference is? Why it went up instead of remaining the same at the ridge line?
It went up about 10 inches, and that's just when we did the sloped roof, as opposed to the straight-up parapet wall, to get the depth we needed to hide the mechanical equipment. We needed a few extra inches.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, any other questions, Commissioners? None. All right, I do have 2 speaker cards on this, and the first one is William Kashub. Oh, okay. Mary Ellen Kashub.
It's the first time he's deferred. Hopefully not the lot. I'm Mary Ellen Kashub. I'm at 320 Masal, and I'm here to voice the neighbor's opinion, and we do support the new design. And I want to tell you briefly how it was for us to get there. You asked, and I'm really happy to tell you. At the end of the last meeting, where you all weighed in and voted to have it go back to design, we took that as neighbors very seriously, and I think Chris Blackwell and Chris Spalding did also. As neighbors, we met, took all the points you had made and charted them on a flip chart. And then we went and looked at our neighborhood and looked at the issues we had and charted those also, prioritized what we needed to do, what was the most important. And then we met with both Chris's, laid those out, and under the guidance of Leonard Pacheco, and I thank him a lot because he was able to really facilitate this process, we presented Blackwell and Spalding with your comments, our comments, et cetera, and had a really good discussion in our living room about all this. A little over a week or so later, they came back with a preliminary design. We discussed that again. Refinements were made. And then we've really hit a finalization with what they have before you. So the main things of design, of trees, of the parking lot, I think in the end, as many times happens, the collective thinking came out with a lot better design on both sides than it would have initially. So I really thank you for the input you all had that helped guide us with a process that I think is a win-win. Now, that said, the traffic on that corner is horrific. And as a neighborhood, we would like to propose that instead of those little concrete bumps that sit there, broken right now, that some kind of a medium be put in there of river rock that would match what goes down Highway 9, going far enough down so people don't do the UE. That's illegal. And a sign be put slightly in to announce no left turns on Highway 9. The backup that causes as people sit there and wait for the chance to run the traffic to make that sign is very dangerous. So there's two ways we think that we could help that process. And of course, the retail use of the building is always a concern for us because there's no available parking on the street that we come into the neighborhood, and then, that would be it. That's it.
Thank you very much. Oh, wait a minute, Ms. Kashub. Let's see if we have some questions for you. Okay, Commissioner Bourgeois.
I just wanted to clarify with staff and ask them if those considerations would be part of Public Works traffic calming program.
They may or may not be, but we can also, if it's not included as the Masal traffic calming project, we can bring it up through the CIP process for next year.
And does this project doesn't have the need for community benefit, does it?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask for clarification on the traffic calming project? Because I know there's one down on the 100 block of Masal, but I'm not aware of anything that's being done on the 300 block where we are, and then the last block that goes up into Highway 9.
We could see if the Masal traffic calming project could be expanded to include the area that you're discussing.
I would like to see that, and would like to have the traffic engineer consult with one of our neighbors about how they count cars on that stretch.
This isn't related to this project, but we'll be happy to have the Public Works Director contact you.
Okay. Will Hood would like to do that.
Just a minute, Ms. Kashub. Mr. Parsons, did you want to add anything to that?
I was merely going to suggest what Bud did,
Okay.
that we get the Public Works Director in touch with the people in the neighborhood. We've talked about it considerably and have a lot of ideas.
Right. Thank you. That's what we're here to do, is help residents. I do have a comment, and I thank you very much for sharing the process with us. It almost sounds like you've developed a template for challenges and solutions to group discussions with projects like this. Maybe you would like to share that with us. I mean, I don't know. Was it a template, or was it just...
I think in any negotiations, you have to have two sides that are willing to work out and find middle ground. So this one worked.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. No more questions. I don't have any other speaker cards on this, so Mr. Spalding, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you meant deferred totally. Oh, sorry, Mr. Kashub, I apologize.
I'd just like to let you know that my wife ran the meetings and I made the cookies and supplied the juice. So she deferred on that to me. A couple of things. One of the things that we asked them to do when we met was to flip the building and make it face out to Route 9. That was one thing that many of you brought up. They made in my opinion, a very good faith effort to do that. And to the neighbors and to everyone, it simply did not work. For one of the reasons was that a lot of the parking under a building that would face Route 9, a lot of the parking would take place in the back of the building. And the neighbors who are most affected by this chose to have the building rather than a busy parking lot, which would have, in their opinion, required some routine police controls in back of that building because it could arguably be a gathering area later at night. So they made a good faith effort. The one neighbor who was most concerned about it said that they'd rather have the building than the parking. They added lots of trees, which was a concern in the neighborhood. And, I think when they follow through on this, not if they follow through, when they follow through, I think it's going to be a very attractive building. On the traffic situation, we've lived there for only 7 years. It's been a problem, and it's one of these deals where it's a state road, it's a town intersection. And the only thing lacking in the morning when the kids are walking across to Dave's school, there's a parade of moms that are so concerned about that particular intersection that the only thing they're lacking is camouflage uniforms. It's a very, very bad intersection, and it's time for people to stop pointing the finger at someone else to fix it. Because it is only a matter of time until something really bad happens at that intersection. And I think that ought to be a real priority for the town to fix it. That's it. And, one more thing. Chris Blackwell and Mr. Spalding were a pleasure to work with. And when I asked them to flip the building, when we asked them to flip the building, they did make a good faith attempt to do that. And they were a pleasure to work with once Mr. Blackwell got over licking his wounds over not having the plumbing building. So it was fun after that.
Thank you, Mr. Kashuba. Just a minute. Do we have any questions of the speaker? None. Thank you. Mr. Spalding, would you like to return to the podium? Ray, Miss Citizen Ray, if I missed you, I am so sorry. Just a minute. You have it. Thank you. Citizen Ray. Yes.
Yes, I wanted to speak in terms of the community interest about this application. I have taken the time to park there and study the dynamics of the intersection, and I concur with the previous speakers that it is a really potentially dangerous situation, okay? And what I observed, and I want to be on the public record, so if it happens the way I talk about, someone will pay dearly. What I saw just yesterday, a car trying to make a left turn came to a stop at the stop sign, but they couldn't see up Highway 9, okay? Because there's a big sign on that uphill, upstream property that blocks the vision of people driving at that intersection. It's unbelievable. So this car moved into the cross-section, the crosswalk that caps the end of Masol right there, okay, and blocked the crosswalk in order to be able to see up the street. I mean, total abomination in the dynamics of the working ability of the intersection to serve traffic, okay? Also, I want to tell you, the speed limit at that horrible intersection of 35 miles an hour coming down Highway 9 is an abomination, okay? 4 miles away at the opposite end in Saratoga, identical school crosswalk, identical major intersection, everything's identical. What's the speed limit in Saratoga? 30 miles an hour. On the same state highway, 30 miles an hour. But in Los Gatos, where nobody seems to give a damn in that so-called engineering department, believe me, out to lunch turkeys is my description, okay? Someone needs to represent the people of this community, engineering-wise, and go down to the state and get that speed limit reduced, because it makes a hell of a difference in the dynamics of the intersection in Saratoga. It is really totally different from the Los Gatos intersection, and totally different in a much more safe and sane way, okay? So, Machichi, he doesn't want to hear me talk, so he's watching his watch.
Thank you, Citizen Ray.
Yeah, okay. I'll come back, except I don't want to talk to Machichi anymore.
Okay, thank you, Citizen Ray. Thank you. I will call up the applicant, Mr. Spalding, you're representing the applicant. Would you please return to the podium? Thank you. Do you have any more questions, Commissioners? Would you like to say anything? Okay, I do have another small question, and that is when I visited, excuse me?
Pardon me, what?
Yes.
Oh, they just wanted me to point out that the owner is not Chevron anymore. Chris Blackwell is the owner of the project.
Thank you very much for pointing that out. That was what is on the staff report, and we will reflect that change. Thank you. Okay, thank you. My question is, when I visited the site just recently and saw the change of the story poles, I wondered, are you planning on putting any vegetation behind the building that's adjacent to the fence that's a common fence between the new building and the neighbors?
The residences?
Yes, the residences.
Yeah, there's a row of
just remind me.
fruitless olives.
Okay. Thank you.
Which
All
was a
right.
tree that they liked, so that we used.
Well, I appreciate both of your efforts. You really captured the essence of what the Planning Commission had directed you to do, and you have designed a building, I think, that really captures also the historic district, and it will be a welcomed addition to that corner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't have any more questions, so I'm going to close this part of the public hearing and turn this over to commission members for discussion, motions. Commissioner Bourgeois.
I'd like to go ahead and make a motion. I think this is an example of exactly what we like to see happen in town. Our direction was followed. There's collaboration and cooperation between the applicant and the neighborhood, and I think it was a win-win situation. So I want to make a motion to approve Arkansas application S-07-158, requesting approval to construct a new commercial building on property zone C2. And I make the findings that this project is categorically exempt under CEQA pursuant to section 15303, that the exterior architecture, based on input from staff and our consulting architect and our own evidence that was submitted, that it is consistent with the town's commercial design guidelines, and that as required by Section 4B of the redevelopment plan for Central Los Gatos redevelopment project, that it meets the use set forth in the town's general plan.
I'll second it.
So I have a motion and a second. Commissioners, any questions? Discussion? Commissioner Kane.
Commissioner Bourgeois, is there a way you think we can get into your motion based on tonight's testimony and concerns that we have, to express preferential consideration for professional occupants versus retail? They may need to come back for CUP. And I think, well, not if it's a sole proprietor, but is most likely a retail would need to come back to us for a CUP, and either our minutes today, a discussion today, or the motion itself should reflect a preference if the owner is able to accommodate that.
I think it would be our hope that the intentions expressed are followed through, but I will defer to staff on whether or not we can incorporate that into the motion.
The zone is the zone, and there are uses that are allowed and not allowed. The only commercial uses, retail uses that are allowed are what are non-formula retail, but everything else is regulated through the CUP process.
Yes, it's no.
Okay, does that answer your question? All right, thank you. I think I'll call for the motion then. Do we have any other discussion? Okay, then I will call for the motion. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? None. Motion carries 7-0.
And anyone, excuse me for just one moment. Anyone dissatisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission may appeal the decision to the Town Council. The appeal must be filed within 10 days. It must be filed upstairs in the Clerk Department. There is a fee for filing an appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Korb. Congratulations and good luck.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
for the record, I'd like to restate that because of my firm's involvement in the following project, I'll be recusing myself from item 3.
Okay, Commissioner Bourgeois, thank you. Did I lose another commissioner?
Let's take a short, just let me see here.
Okay. Just for a moment. Okay, we're going to take just about a few minutes here while we reorganize. Thank you. all commissioners, present, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's all right. Let's move on to item number 3. At 15881 Linda Avenue and 15950 Stephanie Lane, it's Plan Development Application PD-05-02, Architecture and Site Application S-06-050, Negative Declaration ND-07-07, requesting approval to change the zone from R18 to R18 PD for a 7-lot subdivision for a lot line adjustment between 2 parcels zoned R18 and approval to demolish a single-family residence. No significant environmental impacts have been identified as a result of this project, and a mitigated negative declaration is recommended. APNS 523-25-020 and 036. Property owners are Jennifer Dendas and Dan Blue, and the applicant is Linda Court Partners. To give context tonight, this entire application is a continuation from 2 previous public hearings in July and August of 2007. The matter was continued from September 26, 2007 meeting to allow town staff and town's environmental consultants time to review and respond to an environmental report provided at the public hearing on August 22, 2007. Previous to that, there was a study session on July 12th, 2006, that the commission was the hearing body. Mr. Korb, would you care to clarify for all of us the scope of tonight's hearing?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the Commission and members of the audience. As Chair Talasfore stated, the matter was continued with a very specific purpose in mind, and that was to allow staff to and the applicant to review a purported environmental report that was submitted at the last hearing on September 26th and as a consequence had not been seen or reviewed by either the applicant or the staff prior to that meeting. So the matter was continued to allow that review and any additional comments or information that either staff or the applicant would provide in response to that report, which again they didn't have an opportunity to see or respond to. We also had a concern with regard to CEQA that the bar is low for challenging a mitigated negative declaration in this case, and wanted to ensure that if there was any significant information concerning potential negative environmental impacts addressed in that report, that they could be evaluated and, if necessary, to make changes to the project or to enhance the environmental review process as a consequence that could occur before the Commission made any decisions. Otherwise, the public hearing was closed, as you pointed out, at the first hearing in July. It was a full public hearing. People had an opportunity, all persons had an opportunity to address the project. In September, when the matter was last heard, Chair Talasfore made clear that she hoped that people would limit their comments to any new information, not a repeat of what had already been introduced by people testifying at prior hearings. People in the audience were very respectful of that, and that made it possible to move the process forward. But the Commission expressed a concern at the last meeting about the possibility of people continuing to submit new information and then asking for an opportunity to respond to that information, whether intentionally or not, filibustering the decision-making process, and thus ultimately move to limit the public hearing so that it would be possible to address the last issue, that environmental report, and then go to decision, whatever that may be. So for purposes of this hearing, you have been given in the supplemental staff report staff's response with regard to that report, and the underlying information from staff's consultant, environmental consultant, concerning the report, as well as the written comments provided by the applicant to the report. I will note for the record that the applicant has, with good reason, been very concerned about the quality of the report that was dropped at the last meeting, and about the qualifications of the author of the report to make some of the conclusions that the report purports to make regarding potential environmental impacts, including geological impacts and so on. We have informed the applicant, though we understand the applicant's concerns, that we're far more concerned about content. But for the Commission, it is important to note that the author of the report was not a licensed geologist. Whether that person or that person's firm could be considered experts for the purpose of submitting this report is ultimately a factual question that a court would determine. However, you, as the trier of fact in this case, get to weigh the credibility of any expert, any witness who testifies, and in so doing, consider the qualifications of that person or persons to reach the conclusions that they reach in their testimony. So I leave that to you. But I, again, want to point out that staff and staff's consultants have concerned themselves solely with content and have responded in the reports, the supplemental reports you have before you, on the content of the report. It's a conservative approach, but for CEQA purposes, it satisfies our needs to ensure that your process is well protected.
Thank you very much, Mr. Korb. Okay, and with that, I'm going to introduce Ms. Bailey in just a minute. I wanted to tell you the intention here tonight, Commissioners, is to hear the presentations by the staff and their consultants, and then if the applicant has any rebuttal on those reports, then we'll hear from the applicant. But if not, we will not. And then we're going to take a break before we begin the discussion, just because we'll see how long this goes, and I wanted to make sure that you weren't in seats. It says we have about 3 hours for this, and I think we probably need a break. So, but also I wanted to remind you that recently the town adopted guidelines for land use development near creeks and streams, and this is the first development under that adoption. Okay. All right. With that, Ms. Bailey.
Thank you.
There you are.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm over here. I have to use the overhead. The report that was prepared for tonight's meeting responds to the document which was prepared by Verna Jagour and presented by the neighbors that expressed some concerns regarding the environmental review. The report also addresses comments that were raised by the neighbors. Although it was not required, the applicant's biological consultant prepared a riparian enhancement plan, which is included as Exhibit DD of your report. The plan assisted the town in the review process to clarify the creek protection mitigation measures which have been incorporated into the project. This plan is only preliminary, and a final plan will be required prior to the actual restoration. And I'd also like to point out that there was a desk item prepared tonight in reference to the riparian plan that also discussed the willow trees that need to be saved. At the last public hearing on this matter, the neighbors presented some photographs regarding potential flood hazards, and also discussed that at the Ross Creek at the subject site. The environmental consultant and town staff did some additional site visits, and we also researched the matter, and Fletcher Parsons will be able to discuss that at the conclusion of my presentation. In summary, it was determined that the comments raised and the clarifications made to the creek protection do not identify any new significant impacts or require substantial revisions to the mitigated negative declaration. Therefore, there is no need to recirculate the mitigated negative declaration. As noted in the staff report, staff is recommending a few changes to the plan. These changes do not significantly change the project. They're considered minor, and they will not impact the project's environmental review. One of the changes we are recommending is to relocate the bioswales. The bioswales, actually not on this plan, but they run along here right now and in here. Although the location of the bioswales are acceptable, there are alternatives to relocate the bioswales outside of these areas. And so therefore, we've included in the performance standards of the draft plan development ordinance a condition that they be relocated outside of these areas. We are also proposing, and which we've included in the PD ordinance, is to relocate the rear property lines. Currently, the rear property lines run along the top of Bank, and we are recommending that those property lines be relocated along the garden walls that are proposed. And the purpose of recommending that these garden walls be the rear property lines is that clearly shows that this is the boundaries, the limits of the property owner, that they cannot do any development beyond this area. We've had, previously we had conditions of deed restrictions and the CC&Rs to discuss what can happen beyond here, but this is really clarifies to the property owner that this is the limits to your boundaries and you cannot go any further. In relocating these rear property lines, we also would recommend that the garden walls be extended to each of the side property lines, so that it's clear from this side to this side, and then the line be extended down here, that this is the limits of their rear property line. And then on Lot 4, it would also be extended a little ways as well. By relocating the rear property lines, it does reduce the rear setbacks, but the building footprints do not change. The project does not change. It's just that the rear property lines would change. And the only lot that would become non-conforming to a rear yard setback, if it was a standard subdivision lot, would be Lot 4, and it would be approximately about an 8-foot Lot 3, and it would be approximately an 8-foot side set or rear setback. But as part of a PD, you can request to deviate from town code requirements, and staff believes that this is the purpose of a PD, to provide a quality project by deviating from some of the standards. And by making this the rear property line, staff would be recommending that the stairs that go down into these areas be eliminated because they're not needed. And the current plans have the side yard fences. They're low fences that are removable to allow access for the water district. We're recommending that these fences also be removed. The town's environmental consultants, Valerie and Fritz Geyer, and the town's biological consultant, Mike Woods, are all here tonight to answer any questions of the Planning Commission. In addition, we are fortunate to have Dave Johnston from the California Department of Fish and Game also here tonight to answer any questions. And at this moment, I'd like to turn it over to Fletcher Parsons.
I'm going to provide a brief overview of what a flood study is, how one's conducted, and summarize the results of the project's flood study. Flood study has...
Excuse me, Mr. Parsons, can you hold the microphone just a little bit
sorry.
closer?
I didn't want to talk too loud.
No, you're not. Thank you.
Okay. The flood study consists of two basic components, the hydrologic analysis and the second component being a hydraulic analysis. The hydrologic component involves estimating rainfall runoff volumes as well as runoff volumes. Statistical models are used to estimate the rainfall, which is in turn used to estimate surface runoff volumes. The relationship between the rainfall and the runoff is dependent on quite a few factors, including the slope of the project and the level of development or impervious area of it. The second component, once you've determined how much water has come down, is the hydraulic component, where you're routing it through pipes, creeks, and whatever the storm drain system is. Mathematical models are used to estimate the water surface elevation within the storm drain facilities for any particular storm drain event. In the town's case, we look at the 10-year and the 100-year storm. The 10-year we look at to keep for smaller facilities, but the 100-year is what we look at for regional facilities like Ross Creek. So what is a 10-year or 100-year storm? Those are events that would be expected to recur on average every 10 years or every 100 years. You could theoretically have 2 10-year storms occur in back-to-back years, or you could go 30 years without having a 10-year storm. It's just on average, that's what you'd expect it to be. There's also different levels of detail which you can conduct a study. The National Insurance Agency prepares maps where they're mapping the whole country and looking at flood elevations for the whole country. So they're doing a broad brush approach to it. And if you look at their map for the project area, it looks, it just looks like this. There's not really any specific information about where. This is Ross Creek through the middle here, and the dark area is what they're identifying as the 100-year flood area. And it's not specific. It doesn't give flood elevations, and it's hard to tell anything specific about it if you're going to design a project. But that's one level of study. The next level would be what the Water District prepared, where they took a look at what the zoning is for that whole drainage basin. And they looked, based on the zoning, they decided, what the impervious area was going to be. They didn't really look at what it was developed as today, but more what it was zoned to be developed as. And then ran a model and calculated the runoff rates. And they came up with, for the 10-year storm, they came up with 710 CFS and cubic feet per second, and 1,210 cubic feet per second for the 100-year storm. But again, it was a regional type study, and they didn't give us specific flood elevations. So the developer's civil engineer took those runoff rates from the Water District and ran a hydraulic model. They surveyed 3 sections through the site and then routed that water through those sections and came up with flood elevations. And that's what's on this drawing here. These were the 3 sections that they took, and I've plotted the 100-year water surface elevation in the dark line here. And so what we see from that is that, well, first off, the top of bank is the edge of the hatching. So it's this edge here. And so for the most part, except for up here at the top and down here at this end, the 100-year is contained within the banks of the creek. It's clear that it doesn't extend up to where the sanitary sewer runs or up to where the garden walls are proposed. It's well clear of that. The other thing that we were looking for was the freeboard between the 100-year water surface and the proposed finished floor elevations. And, it varies anywhere from 6 feet to the basement on the cellar on Lot 1, and 11 feet to the finished floor on Lot 4. So it's well clear of the 2 feet that's required. The depths of flow vary from 5 feet to 5.5 feet across this section of creek. We looked at the photos that the neighbors provided and tried to estimate what the depths of flow were. They provided 2 sets of photos. One was from 04 and one was from 06. The ones from 04, the water was, we guessed it was on the order of 5 feet deep, which is still within reason of what we're seeing here from the mathematical calculations. So I think it's fairly reasonable. We know that the creek down there is a little bit narrower, and so that might explain it being as high as it is. Also wanted to point out that the difference between the 10-year and the 100-year water surface is about 1 foot to 1.5 feet. And so the 10-year is still a quite high flow compared to the 100. It's 4 feet instead of 5. But it's still deep. Let's see. The project isn't going to perform any grading within the channel banks. Basically the garden wall is the edge of disturbance except for constructing a storm drain. So there won't be a modification of the creek bank in any way. And let's see. The last item I wanted to address was one of the speakers at the last public hearing had brought up the issue of whether a programmatic EIR was required to address increases in flow due to development, increased impervious area. And this is actually being addressed Bay Area wide by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Right now, it's currently addressed only for large projects over an acre of impervious replaced or proposed have to match, their post-development runoff has to match pre-development so they can have no increase in flow for large projects. In the next permit from the Water Board, which is expected to be adopted in January, they're going to start having all the agencies report any projects that have 1,000 square feet or more of impervious area added, and they're going to look at it Bay Area wide and see if this is a problem and address it Bay Area wide in a systematic, consistent way so that all the agencies will be treating it the same way. That's it. Any questions?
Commissioners, do you have any questions of either Ms. Bailey or Mr. Mr. Parsons? Commissioner Sayoc.
Actually, Mr. Parsons, since you have the microphone, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Thank you for that presentation. It was very helpful. I guess I didn't understand. Did you actually run the model, or who ran the model with all the flooding?
Well, the information came from two sources. The flow rates came from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and then the developer's engineer, Westfall Engineers, ran the hydraulic model to give us the actual water surface elevations specific to this site.
When they ran the model, did they run it with existing riparian conditions? And the reason, what I'm getting at is, once you change the density of the riparian habitat, that will affect how fast the flood rates will go. And we have some preliminary information on what it may look like based on the riparian enhancement plan. So have new modeling be done? Have you done any new models that will show, based on the new riparian habitat, what that flow information will look like?
No. What they did was they assumed a very bad congested channel so that they would get conservative estimates on the water height, water surface elevation. So in cleaning the channel out and removing some of the undergrowth and some of those things, the water surface will actually go down.
The water will go down, but it would also flow at a higher rate.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have another question, Commissioner?
Not for Mr. Parsons.
For
Actually,
Mr. Bailey? Ms. Bailey?
For either Ms. Baylor or Mr. Parsons.
Okay.
Can you show me where exactly you are recommending the bioswales be relocated to on your map?
Sure. Right now, the bioswale in question is right through the middle of this piece of riparian area. We would relocate it just on the slope above. We could terrace it up there. We could, and if we can't find a way to make that work, there's other ways of providing filtration, for example, under the curb of the street.
So we're just looking at, because on the existing plan that I have, it shows that there will be two bioswales.
Correct. It's just the one upstream one. It's towards the bottom of the sheet.
At the bottom of the sheet. Okay.
Right. It's the short segment.
And by moving it to a newer location, will you at any point change the area of that bioswale? Will it still accommodate the same amount?
It'll have to. These will have to meet a numerical requirement by the regional board.
Okay. And will that in any way affect the location of the outfall?
No.
Okay. And then my next question is with regards to pulling the rear setback. If you were to move the rear setback to, at a minimum, the garden wall, have you run any numbers on how that affects lot sizes?
No, we have not.
Okay. Those are my questions for now.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have a question? I have one. I think this would, I'm not sure who could answer. I think Ms. Bailey, you could probably answer this. The retaining walls that are proposed at the moment, is there any reason that that they have to just be straight? Is there any reason that they could not perhaps, be a little more mimicking of the streamline?
Yes, they could be altered.
Okay, without any problem, it wouldn't cause any,
No, and they're just low, they're actually garden walls, so I mean, they're less than 4 feet, so.
Right, okay. All right, thank you. Okay, Commissioners, Ms. Bailey, did you want to present any other consultants, or?
They are here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the consultants that are here? Who are they? Would you please identify who the consultants are?
We have Valerie and Fritz Geyer from Geyer & Geyer Associates. They're our environmental consultants.
Thank you.
We have Mike Woods, the biological consultant, and Dave Johnston, representative from the California Department of Fish and Game.
Okay. All right. I guess we don't have any questions for, Commissioner Sayok.
Madam Chair, how would you like to proceed? I do have questions of all of them. So should they come up?
Why don't you just call who you'd like, and then they'll present themselves.
Okay. Well, let's start with our consultants.
If you have questions of all of them, you know what, I'm going to ask all of you then to go ahead and move over on that side of the room. Thank you. Or if you wanted to, Commissioners, you could just ask the question, then one of them could decide who would like to answer. How about that?
That sounds fine.
Okay.
Sure. Let me introduce myself. I'm Fritz Geyer, Geyer & Geyer Consulting, and with me, as was mentioned, is Valerie Geyer, the other member of our firm, and Mike Wood, our biologist, and then, of course, there's the Dave Johnson from Fish and Game. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have about the environmental issues that are addressed in the mitigated neg deck and in the initial study.
Okay.
And I think basically, I can answer the questions regarding initial study and mitigated neg deck in general. If there are specific questions regarding riparian or vegetation issues, then Mike Wood can answer those questions. And then for historical purposes of other projects in the town, Valerie Geyer can answer those questions, because those were raised at previous meetings.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, my first question is regarding water quality. And let me just premise it. The reason I'm concerned is because Ross Creek, as you mentioned in the initial study, is tributary to Guadalupe River, which is on the Section 303D list. Because it's impaired, are there any other special measures that we need to consider with the size of this project, given the amount of runoff that may be coming from it?
The town's conditions for maintaining or improving water quality that flows from proposed developments in the town covers all the conditions that are required for ensuring that the water quality is basically protected. So I think Fletcher could probably add to that if you wanted to.
And so I understand the bias wells, perforate subdrains, those are fine. Who's ultimately responsible for maintenance of that and ensuring that quality coming from those drains and that outfall is a quality that is acceptable for Ross Creek?
Well, ultimately, the town is going to be responsible to monitor that. But as part of the initial study and mitigated neg deck process, there will be a mitigation monitoring and reporting program that will be prepared and will be it will need to be approved by the town along with mitigated neg deck in the initial study. And that monitoring report will address the standards that the town requires, who's responsible, at what times that it's monitored, and for the period of time that it's monitored. So it's the mitigation monitoring report requirement was added a number of years ago to CEQA in response to exactly the kind of concerns that you've presented. So that will be part of the overall approval.
If I could add on to that, one of the conditions of approval, and this is required by the town's permit with the state, is that we perform, first off, that we enter a contract with the homeowners association for maintenance of it, and the town has to inspect it and report the inspections annually to the regional board.
And then my next question is regarding the habitat that this creek ultimately, I guess Ross Creek itself has not been determined to provide any habitat of any endangered or threatened species.
That's correct.
But there is some question that it may, because it's a tributary, it does lead to Guadalupe River, which does provide habitat for certain species.
That's correct. Right.
What are the limitations there, because it is a tributary? And I've read your response, but could you just elaborate it further?
Sure. Well, I'm not a fisheries expert, and I could defer that to Mike Wood, but let me answer your question directly. And this is an issue that was brought up in Ms. Jigger's report. Essentially, the riparian vegetation on the site does provide certain benefits to the stream water that flows through there. However, if you look in a total context of Ross Creek, downstream you have basically an exposed constructed channel, which basically will affect whatever water temperatures that occur or are preserved in Ross Creek along the project site. As soon as it reaches downstream, the channel is unprotected. It's subject to thermal conditions, and so even though the plan is to preserve vegetation on the site and enhance it, still the effects for downstream fisheries will probably be not improved.
Commissioner Sack, do you have more questions?
Not of Mr. Is it
Geyer?
Geyer. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Do you have another question? I'm going to let you go ahead. I will give you, yes, go
Okay.
ahead. I don't see another hand up, and when I do, I'll let you know. Thank you.
I guess my next question is with trees, so whoever is best suited for that.
Go ahead and ask the tree question, and then, you know what, why don't you go ahead and ask your question, then they'll decide who should speak, and then they'll just...
Okay,
get up.
so
Thanks.
there have been conflicting reports about exactly how many trees will be removed. I don't know who the best person to answer that question.
Probably you. That has to do with the arborist assessment.
Right. It seems that the number of trees to be removed has fluctuated because essentially the recommendations of H.T. Harvey, the applicant's biologist, has amended the recommendations that the arborists have made. So essentially, the native riparian vegetation, which basically includes willows and oaks as well. The recommendation from the arborists has been to remove a certain number of willows from the riparian zone, based on the health and vigor of those particular specimens. H.C. Harvey has recommended that they stay, basically because they do provide some habitat value, but they are poor condition. And so essentially the mitigation that was presented originally in the initial study and mitigated neg deck has been modified to retain those willows. So essentially at this point, I haven't looked at the current count, but I believe that there are 2 or 3 native riparian trees that are going to be removed. I'd have to check the exact count.
Now, one of our desk items, I've noticed, did include a new condition for trees that were mentioned in the latest riparian enhancement plan to be retained. But it did omit number 81, and so I was just curious if there was a specific reason why.
81 is a separate condition that was with the previous report regarding the blue oak. So that is still protected.
Okay. So it sounds like 2 or 3 native trees within the riparian corridor will be removed.
I believe so. The majority, I did the count, I believe there were 9, if I'm not mistaken, originally, and then something like, I believe 5 or 6 of those are willows that were going to be retained.
Okay. And the 2 or 3 that will be removed that are native in the riparian corridor, do you know why?
Health and vigor, I assume.
Health and
They're the arborist's recommendation that those be removed. They are part of the total number of trees that in the riparian zone that were recommended for removal by the arborists.
Okay. Okay.
So they may present liability in terms of, and also hazard.
Okay. And there was a comment in one of the reports that trees cannot be planted within the 10-foot sewer wide, 10-foot wide storm sewer easement. Can you explain why?
Thank you. Thank you. Basically, the planting of trees in the easement is an issue for the Santa Clara Valley Water District. They need to retain access to their easement, and in the past, the recommendations we've made regarding planting of trees in the easements have hinged on what the district has requested or required in their review process. So I understand there was a comment, I believe there was some correspondence from the applicant stating that they are in negotiation with the district and that planting may be possible within that easement. So, but I'm unaware of the conditions of that.
And then my next question is specific to the setback and how that was determined. So.
Sure. Well, going way back, the setback was originally presented on the site plans that were submitted to the town. We took that as a given. My understanding is that the setback was determined based on recommendations from the applicant's biologist, H.T. Harvey, and also the 25-foot setback has been a regular requirement from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. They routinely made that recommendation where their facilities were involved. So I believe, and the applicant can correct this if he likes, that 25-foot setback was as a result of those two recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if you just wanted to add something to that, Mr. Wood. Okay. And then I guess my next question is for our representative from Department of Fish and Game.
Certainly.
Would you please state your name?
My name is Dave Johnston. I'm the DFG staff member for Santa Clara County for essentially most of the non-game issues.
Mr. Johnston, thank you for coming tonight. I understand it might be a long day for you, and so I appreciate your being here. This is our 3rd meeting now, and we have had significant discussion on the appropriate setback for Ross Creek. You've probably seen all the correspondence, and given your expertise, and I understand that you've actually done site visits now, you've actually looked at the information, and it is your opinion that 10 foot, and please correct me if I'm wrong, 10 foot from the outer drip line is what your agency is recommending? Is that correct? Or am I confused?
Excuse me, it would probably be a little more correct to say that we're willing to accept that.
Okay, would you like to elaborate on that? When you say willing to accept,
Well, the department's general recommendation for a riparian setback is 100 feet from the edge of our jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction is generally defined as the continuous edge of riparian vegetation. However, when we're evaluating a particular project, we evaluate a lot more. The 100 feet is a standard. Depending on what values you're trying to get from your riparian corridor, you would either increase or decrease that. But there are so many other factors that go into it, like the quality of the corridor that's in existence, the type of development that's located near to it, the habitat value of the particular area in relation to what's around it, the potential for the area to be a significant or enhanced habitat, depending on what you might do with it. So for this particular development, it's an isolated pocket. It's fairly degraded. It's not likely to be enhanced to provide significant additional habitat. So under those sorts of conditions, a lesser buffer might be appropriate because you're not going to get that much more without completely altering the site. So as I say, in this particular case, we're willing to accept something less because we're not going to get significant more habitat value without a lot more property.
Thank you for that clarification. That's all I needed.
Terrific. Anybody else? Commissioner Kane.
We've been on this case for a number of years. We went to CDAC. It's gone through study sessions, and this is our third Planning Commission hearing. And during those 2 years, and through these reams of material specific to the Linda Avenue case, and there's more. For example, this is 30 pages of the guidelines for standards for land use near streams. It came to the Planning Commission in January of 007. It's got about 200 more pages to it. This is primarily... I have to ask you a question. Are you feeling well?
Blue. My favorite color is blue.
Thank you. We're laying foundation here. There's been a great deal of material to study on this, and we've chosen to put in many hours in studying on this, but somewhere I read, along the lines of good fences, good neighbors make, the sarcasm, that houses ought not back up to streams. I read it in a letter written in 005 to the applicant, and I thought I read it in one of the 200 and something pages in the guidelines to building near streams. And I can't seem to put my finger on it, but it was the opinion of some experts that it's just not a good idea to put houses, backyards, backing up against streams if there's an alternative. And it comes to my mind, the alternative is stream, green, road, house. And we have some examples in that regard, one of them called Ross Creek, and we passed out a diagram to suggest that we have the creek, we have the green area, we have the road, we have the house. I'm just wondering, with this plethora of experts on green science, if anyone has a comment on the wisdom of putting houses on streams, of having backyards go to streams, versus if there's an alternative to have the road that supports the house be in between the house and the green and the stream. Did one of you write that? Does one of you have an opinion on that?
That criteria probably came from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Actually has some design criteria that they've developed. But that is a fairly standard approach in design, that if you have the ability, you should have less intense or uses that have less chance of causing an impact to the riparian corridor as sort of a proxy buffer on the outside of your other buffer. So yeah, that's generally a better design criteria.
As and if appropriate, I'm going to press for that point, and I'm just wondering, now that there's the opportunity, does any expert here have a disagreement with that? Can you tell me about it?
Would you please state your name for the record, too?
My name is Michael Wood, and I'm assisting Geyer & Geyer with review of the project for the town. Not wanting to buck the trend of my dear colleague here, there are distinct disadvantages of having busy thoroughfares running adjacent to riparian corridors. One is that you have a lot of contaminants coming off of roads going right into creeks, but the other is that you have a significant greater amount of vehicle and light and noise disruption adjacent to the riparian corridors. In a backlot, you have maybe barking dogs, maybe lawnmowers, but it's a periodic disruption of activity, human activity, and of course some lighting effects. But along a busy road, you have quite a bit more opportunity for disrupting bird behavior, nesting and breeding behavior, as well as roadkill.
Commissioner Kane?
I understand what you said, and I cannot disagree with that. What we're talking about here is a cul-de-sac. It's not a busy thoroughfare. I mean, you're familiar with the project. The road would essentially be as long in either case. If it was Stream House Road or Stream Green Road House, the road would still be about the same length. So and it's not a busy thoroughfare. In fact, it might be less busy if we couldn't fit the existing number of houses on such a redesign.
Right. Yeah, of course, I was speaking in a general sense, and
I appreciate your passion for that, and I agree with you. This is just a little old country cul-de-sac.
Fair enough, sure. Regarding a specific project like this, having a cul-de-sac come back, I'm not exactly sure how it could be redesigned to bring a cul-de-sac back into the road, back into the creek edge. I'd just say, show me a plan and we could comment on it.
Well, there's one there now. It's pretty much what's there now.
No, I mean of what I think what you're describing as an alternative layout.
It would require moving the road some degree toward the creek, but then there would be a green buffer barrier, there'd be the retaining walls, there'd be the setbacks, there'd be the et ceteras, and the houses would be on the other side of the road.
Would be farther away from the creek.
And we have a so-called, what I've referred to in the past as the Ross Creek model, where another development was done exactly that way.
Without actually, I guess seeing a picture of something like that, I guess it would be hard for me to comment on what I think it might look like.
But you don't disagree with the advantage of having that over houses, backyards right up on the creek?
In a way I do. In a way I do disagree. A backyard is a biofiltration facility if it's landscaped. Obviously if you've got a basketball court or a tennis court or something, a lot of concrete, then you have impervious surfaces. But if you've got a landscaped yard, barring the use of excessive use of pesticides and fertilizers, but you've got something that's infiltrating, the water is going into the ground as opposed to running straight off and into the creek. So in a way, a backyard is a vegetated green buffer between the actual home and the riparian corridor. In this case, it's riparian trees, not really a corridor, but I guess it really would depend a lot on the context. In this particular site, I'm not sure that there is a big benefit because you have, what's the width of a road? 22 feet at least? So you have a large expanse of pavement between the tree line and the homes. I'm not sure that this doesn't add anything in terms of habitat value. Having vegetation adds something in terms of habitat value, but pavement does not, my opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kane. Wait, will Mr. Woods come back up? Commissioner Sayoc.
Following up on that, I understand 22 feet of asphalt would not provide habitat value, but 22 feet of buffer that was not asphalt would.
All right, yes.
So I guess I'm just following Commissioner Kane's logic and trying to figure out what is best to protect the riparian habitat. And if a road necessarily isn't the best, then that 22 feet, you're not disputing 22 feet of a buffer from what's already set aside as a buffer and where human habitat begins is a preferred.
Well, if I understand your question, I mean, Dave has indicated that, for example, a 10-foot buffer from the drip line edge to the property line appears to be an adequate buffer. So I wouldn't disagree with that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, do we have any other questions? I have a question, and it's something that it's in a letter, an Exhibit EE, and I'm not sure who would comment on this, but I'll ask my question. It says, and I'll quote this, and it's referring to CEQA and the California Code of Regulations, and it's, quote, and there's a reason I'm asking, and I'll get to it after I read this. A significant effect on the environment is a substantial or potentially substantial adverse change in the environment. Environment is defined as the physical conditions which exist within the area which will be affected by a proposed project, including land, air, water, minerals, flora, fauna, noise, objects of historic or aesthetic significance. I'm just wondering if one of you or Ms. Bailey could comment on aesthetic significance in this case? What does that mean in this context for us and this project? I know land, air, water, minerals, flora, fauna, but...
Well, the aesthetic is, it's one of the most, sure.
Point of clarification from the town attorney. I mean, my understanding is each one of those things doesn't have to apply in each instance. And you're asking the question as if it's a checklist.
No, I'm not.
Well, I understand it to be. Could you clarify your question then?
I just want to understand what aesthetic
Could I have
means.
her, please? Pardon me?
I just want to understand what aesthetic significance means.
In general?
In this context of environment.
This fact?
As it's defined, as environment is defined, what does the aesthetic significance?
And what I'm asking, I direct my question then to Mr. Korb. It seems to me you're asking a legal question, I believe. What is the interpretation of the regulation? And I question whether that's a question that's properly directed to this expert who is not a legal expert.
Well, okay, Mr. Korb, we'll take a ruling on that. I didn't think I was getting into the legality of this at all.
Well, I chose not to interpret it as a legal question. I understood and I understand what you're asking, Commissioner O'Donnell, but I understood what the chair is asking is how, for purposes of the environmental analysis of this project, the aesthetic factors were considered. In other words, how were they identified and considered for purposes of this project?
Thank you. If anyone can answer that.
I'll try to answer that. Basically, in the initial study, the topics are basically presented in a checklist form. So essentially, aesthetics is the first issue that is evaluated in the initial study. Under CEQA, there are 4 criteria, and they are very specific, and we answered those in the context of the project and how they address each of those 4 issues. Aesthetics is one of the more nebulous, is probably the most nebulous question as far as evaluating the impacts. And they do vary from community to community. And so in addressing what kind of impacts there would be on the aesthetics, we take into account how the town views the issue of aesthetics. And that includes privacy, screening issues, and other factors that the town specifically wants included in the evaluation. These vary from community to community. Los Gatos has a more stringent view of what aesthetics are than some other communities that we work in. So basically what we do is we evaluate the quote-unquote aesthetics based on the town's standards. And often it will require if, for example, there are scenic vistas involved, which is one of the state criteria, and one that's an issue for the town, such as hillside projects, then we've been asked to and have done visual studies from great distances. So essentially, how the project appears to the general public, and there's some debate as to how far you take this analysis. But for our purposes, we rely on the town's guidance as to how far how significant it is. And for projects such as this, we rely on how the project will be seen from the surrounding properties. It's not visually prominent from publicly traveled roads, so the general public most likely will not see it. And to provide some additional guidance, the town contracted with, or had a consulting architect who also evaluated the project design and made recommendations, which we incorporated in the initial study and mitigated in ADEC.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I appreciate that. Okay, Commissioners, do we have any other questions at this time? Okay, Commissioner Kane has a question.
Just one comment. I want to thank staff since I think we're done with the experts for the moment. Thanks, staff, for an excellent report. I could understand it. Even I could understand it. And to the town consultants, thank you very much for an outstanding report. I could understand most of it. But I appreciate all the work that was done in helping us with this decision.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, Mr. Korb, I do have, where did they go? I have 3 speaker cards here, and if you would care to comment now, we do have the applicant, I believe, is here tonight, and he is entitled to address anything he heard from the consultant's report. Is that correct?
Well, the applicant has always allowed the last word on the project. The applicant, if I recall correctly, had the last word at the conclusion of the public hearing in general, but did not have the last word, at least with regard to the environmental report and the additional analysis that was provided regarding the environmental report. So if the applicant were to wish to address that report, I think it's for due process purposes appropriate to allow the applicant to do so. With regard to the other speaker cards, and I know this is a difficult issue for the commission and particularly for you as a chair, but I'll answer the question this way. First, are you required to allow additional speakers? You have closed the public hearing except for very limited purposes. You have thus closed off additional evidence to be provided by members of the public. Members of the public have been provided other opportunities to address this specific issue in 2 other public hearings that were held before the commission. The project, as far as I can tell, has not changed substantially in any regard from the project that was commented on. The only changes that I can see are, in fact, minor conditions, or at least conditions that address some of the comments that were made by members of the public intended to ensure that any concerns that they raise are addressed ultimately in the conditions of approval. So are you required to allow them to speak? I believe not. The Brown Act, as somebody referred to previously, says that people do get the opportunity to speak on matters of interest to the town on every agenda, both either before or during any discussion of that item on the agenda. The Brown Act does say, though, that if there has been a prior committee meeting at which people did have a full and fair opportunity to testify, then you're not required to allow them to testify yet a second time on the same matter. Well, this was not discussed previously before a committee. It was discussed before the entire commission on 2 separate occasions. Those hearings were held. So it's my opinion that the Brown Act doesn't require you to allow the people to testify yet again. I also say that because you close the public hearing, you're in that interesting, difficult position of saying, oh, the Brown Act says that maybe requires that we allow you to come up and speak, but we can't actually pay attention to what you're saying because we're not accepting any new evidence. And, of course, people are testifying specifically to bring more evidence in one form or another before the commission for your decision. So it's sort of a catch-22 in that regard. You do have, of course, the discretion as the chair and the rest, with the advice of the rest of the commission to allow people to speak. You have 3 cards. You're talking a maximum of, 9 minutes, but you don't have to do that. So it's really within your discretion. And, of course, if you allow them to speak, then you're sort of listening but not listening at the same time because you've closed the public hearing.
Okay, commissioners, hearing that.
Now it's 5 cards.
Now we have 5 cards. So, hearing that and remembering that we did close the public hearing except for that narrow reports that we've heard, and if the applicant would like to comment on the consultant's reports, I will open the public hearing for you. But with that being said, let me hear what you have to say. Commissioner O'Donnell.
It would seem to me that if we're going to listen to the public as opposed to the applicant, we should reopen. Because I would agree with Mr. Korb, it's meaningless to listen to somebody and say, I'll listen to you, but I can't take into account what you're saying. So I think we at least have to be consistent. I would say if we're not going to reopen, then let's not listen to people talking that we can't listen to, in essence. As far as the applicant goes, the applicant's consultants have now talked. It isn't clear to me what it is that the applicant would be speaking about, except to the extent that the applicant may be speaking to the prior hearing, and I'd like some clarification on that. I don't know, but don't clarify it yet. Let me finish.
Okay.
It is very difficult to tell people that, notwithstanding their strong interest and their hard work, that at some point you've got to stop. That's what we said last time. And I think tonight, we have to decide whether we meant that or whether we've heard something tonight that it would make it unfair not to allow them to respond. So I just want to make sure that we are all clear on that. I have not heard that, and therefore I would not support a motion to reopen. But I'm also troubled by what it is the applicant is speaking to after we've just heard from his consultants, but I'm sure Mr. Korb can clarify that.
But the primary clarification, the consultants that you heard are the town's consultants, not the applicant's consultants. So the applicant has, as you know, submitted a separate letter to the commission, and again, they haven't had the opportunity to verbally speak to what the consultants have said or to their letter, and that's the only issue, I think, left to close with regard to the applicant.
Okay, Commissioner Rice?
I'm sort of at the same point as Commissioner O'Donnell. I do not favor necessarily reopening. I haven't heard anything new that would require additional comments from people from whom we have already heard and who have had their opportunity to speak. I'm sympathetic to the desire to introduce more information and be heard on this issue again. However, I think that it's a dangerous precedent to set, to say, here's our rules, and then the next meeting, well, we didn't really mean it. If there had been something significantly different, if the project had changed, if there was some new evidence that had come forward as a result of what we heard tonight, I'd have a different take on it. But I haven't heard that. So I would propose, if the applicant still wishes to speak in response to this limited issue of what we've heard tonight from the consultants, I'd be fine with that, and then let's go to discussion.
Okay, would any other commissioner like to comment besides me? Okay, Commissioner Kane?
I don't know, as an offer of substantiation, I'm going over the minutes of the August 22 meeting, and the motion was made by myself and seconded by Commissioner O'Donnell to continue the public hearing for the sole purpose of allowing staff to evaluate the additional environmental documentation submitted tonight. To underscore the appropriateness of that motion, I suppose, Town Attorney Ori Korb reiterated that the public hearing has been continued to December 26 for the sole purpose of allowing staff to review and report back to the Planning Commission regarding the additional information provided that night, and you know, at the bottom of the ninth with two out, by the way. And that has caused us to move another month or more from where we could have been. I'm concerned about the amount of time, and the reason that concerns me is because at the August 22 hearing, everyone did get to speak and say what they wanted to say. And having said that, the public hearing was then closed. The only reason it's open now is to evaluate the environmental documentation received at the last minute, and we've done that.
Thank you, Commissioner Kane, and I would just only add thank you, Commissioner Rice and O'Donnell, for your comments as well, and I support what you've said. So, Commissioner Siak, did you want to have something to say? I'm sorry. Thank you. I didn't.
Just two quick comments, and I'll make it quick. I guess I'm going to differ from the rest of my commissioners in that I understand the efficiency and I understand what we said last, but I just personally strongly believe that at a public forum, if people want to speak, we ought to give them that right. So I'll just leave it at that. But I understand what we said last time, and I understand the procedures that my fellow commissioners are following. One question I did want to ask is there is something new in the staff report where the staff is recommending the relocation of the rear property lines, which it also says the applicant opposes. You know, I'm throwing it out there. Is this something that anyone would like to hear the applicant speak about? Why they oppose this and for what reason?
Okay. Commissioner Kane, you want to respond to that?
The response that I hope is constructive. I don't disagree with you, and I don't disagree with your sentiments. But it may be appropriate to remind us that we are making a recommendation. and that all of this shall maybe happen all over again at town council. So no one has been denied the right to speak, and indeed, no one shall be denied the right to speak when this goes to the next level. Tonight, we can only make a recommendation, not a final decision. So.
O'Donnell?
I just want to respond to one half of what you said. I agree with you that we probably ought to let the applicant respond to the suggestions that came up by the consultants, which were not before us at that hearing. Because if we don't, I think we've deprived the applicant who opposes something the opportunity to say why they oppose it. I mean, I think it's fairly obvious why they'd oppose it, but it isn't fair not to put it on the record. But the change here, in no sense, is to prejudice the people who spoke before. All it does is prejudice the applicant. So the earlier recommendation was to allow the applicant to speak in the limited sense, and clearly responding to recommendations that they didn't have before would fit within that limited sense, and I would support that.
Through the chair.
Yes, Mr. Korb.
As I think about the recommendations and the response, the recommendations were, I think as Commissioner O'Donnell pointed out, responses to the environmental reports. In effect, there are additional conditions, or at least recommended additional conditions, that arise because of the response to the environmental document that was submitted at the last meeting and the subsequent work done by the consultants and staff in responding to that document. Under those circumstances, it actually would be, that question or that issue is within the purview, I think, of the, well, shall I say, it's within the confines of the limited subject that the applicant can still address in their closing comments. So it probably would be appropriate under the circumstances.
Right, and that's what I would agree to as well, that those issues of bioswales and stairs were covered in the report tonight from the town staff, so that would certainly be questions that we could ask the applicant about. As far as the other speakers, I do believe that, you know, we've heard a lot. We haven't even had a discussion yet, and most of the people that did speak, whose cards I have already spoken, I mean, who want to speak. So with that, I think I'll just open, I'll need a motion to... No, you don't need a motion. I don't even need a motion? Okay.
You already continued it for this limited purpose,
That's
so
right.
you're just
Okay.
allowing them to complete the loop.
Thank you. So I would like to call... Mr. No, you may not. You're disrupting the meeting. You are. Thank you, Mr. McElroy.
Yes, ma'am.
Throw me out.
It's okay with me.
That's one warning, Susan Ray.
Thank you. Democracy is dead in Los Gatos.
My comment to that is that this was announced at the last meeting. This is not a surprise to anyone that's here tonight. Thank you.
Terry McElroy, 214 Almendra Avenue. It's been 45 long days since our last meeting. Staff, Geyer, Wood Biological, Westfall Engineers, H.T. Harvey, Dave Johnson, Fish and Game, Brian Wines at the Regional Water Quality, Santa Clara Valley Water District, Aaron Gardner, and myself. We've spent several hundred man-hours on this project and tens of thousands of dollars. Well, that's happened in the last 45 days. Sole purpose? The Verna Jagour report. You got our written responses. Not going to torture you guys with going over any of that stuff. You have the written responses. And what's funny is every single item on that report was without merit. There wasn't one consultant that came up with something that, well, maybe we should really look at this thing. It is a problem. Flooding, da-da-da-da-da. You know, Fish and Game's been out there 4 times. That's 4 more than typical. This project has been reviewed and re-reviewed by agencies and found no conflict.
We have no conflict with any of the consultants or the agencies. As far as our response to all the consultants and the agencies, I agree with every single one of those reports. We have no disagreement. Water quality control went out there to the site, and he said, I'm not concerned with this project. I'm concerned with the county neighbors and what they've done to the creek. That's the guys that are complaining. I want to thank you for leaving the public portion closed, with the exception of the town's response and my response to that report. I'm really happy that you held to that premise. I'm going to ask that you vote tonight on this. I want you to send them a message. I'd like to see a message that, hey, it's unanimous, and we're not going to tolerate that kind of stuff, just like this young man that left here. As far as the, I'd like to address the comment that Commissioner Kane said, the ideal thing, and he's really talking about Sierra Morena. I don't know if you've been on that street. Look at that creek. You should go on that one. That is a flat lot. What you were proposing or what you're thinking about could possibly be a good idea, cannot physically happen on this lot. And it's pretty simple. When you have a lot that is like this, and you're going to put the street closer to the creek, let's say 25 feet from the creek, what's going to happen is, the purpose of a street is to service the lots to give them access for ingress and egress. So what happens is when you put the street there, in order to have a decent ingress and egress, you have to elevate that street so high, suddenly you have a 2-to-1 slope, sloping down to the creek, making a huge amount of runoff. And I believe this is what Wood Biological, young man over here, was talking about, that it's not a good thing biologically, and it's not a good thing aesthetically to have a 2-to-1 slope holding up a street because you think you're doing something great for that creek. I would like to also expand on that just one, for 30 seconds. Currently what we have is we've got houses that are, I'm going to do this from memory, 80 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet, 45 feet from the creek. By doing that, by putting the creek over there, by putting the street closer to the creek, you're putting all that runoff closer to the creek. I don't think that's good. I mean, we've got a huge buffer right now. Like he was talking about, we're going to have a lawnmower going off every now and then. But we're going to have 80 feet, like Lot 1 is like 80 feet between it and the creek. Lot 2 has like 55 feet or so. That's a good thing. So to put a street closer, that's not a good thing. That's my response to that one. Response to, you're going to probably ask me a question, what do I think about the recent development with the staff report regarding my back property lines? Number one, I'm not going to make it a huge issue. Would I, if I had to accept that, would I? Probably would.
Okay, Mr. McElroy, thank you, and I would entertain hearing, are you close to wrapping up?
I'm just answering a question that was posed before I got up here.
Okay. Why don't I ask commissioners now if they have some questions for you? Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I had hoped to hear by now, and so I will ask you the question. We understand that you oppose the using the wall line, the back wall line, as the property line as opposed to where it was originally proposed. And I would just like the record to reflect why you oppose that.
Okay. That is what I was getting to, anticipating Commissioner O'Donnell's question. Staff had a private meeting in the last few weeks and discussed the following goals. Those goals that they wanted to obtain, and they decided that we could obtain those goals by making that top of the garden terrace walls the rear property lines, because it would make it clear to the property owners that the area between the garden walls and the creek can't be improved, and that the HOA, instead of individual owners, would be responsible for maintaining this area. those are the two goals they wanted to meet. Well, I believe that we can meet those goals doing it several different ways other than that. By turning it, right, what that does, that turns it into a common area. And we were directed a long time ago. What we want to see is a standard subdivision with a private street. In order to get a standard subdivision with a private street, we don't have a big old open common area there. So I think we can obtain those two goals by doing things with right on the subdivision map. We'd place it right on the subdivision map. Having the HOA documents reflect that, first of all, we always figured that the HOA was going to be handling all that riparian area. Every year, or whatever is recommended, we would have H.T. Harvey or a biologist on contract, and they would be dealing with whatever permitting agency they would have to deal with to keep out the invasive species. It'll be an ongoing project. If it's a once-a-year thing, or if it's a once every 2-year thing, I'm not an expert on that, but whatever the biologists would suggest. So we could do it by means of subdivision map, CC&Rs, HOA documents. You know what we're really talking about? Is there's so many different ways to describe a parcel. We could describe this parcel this way, or we could describe it by lot 1, or meets and bounds. And so that's all we're talking about is how are we going to describe these parcels? Legal description. We could handle this stuff other than make that an HOA ownership. One that everybody will own 1/7 of the property behind my house on lot 1. That's my answer to that one. Okay.
Commissioner Kane?
I'm slightly confused, and I need some help from staff. Before us is a PD, and before us are lots and lots of green issues dealing with the creek. Also before us are 7 houses, and site design and use of site and architecture and site decisions to be made. We're also working with those tonight, yes? No. So if we have A&S questions of the applicant, we should be dealing with those as well as the creek and the green and the report and the counter report and the, we can get seduced by all that green stuff, but we need to also to talk about the design of these houses.
I think the dialogue between the commission and the applicant is closed other than this specific issue that it was open for.
That's true.
Okay,
that is true, except could I just ask you, when I asked the question about the aesthetics in the environment, would that be a reason that we were given the answer of what it was? Could questions about that be asked of the applicant?
Well, you could reopen for that purpose, or you could ask them of us, or ask that they be directed to the council for further discussion.
Okay. Does that help? Okay, Commissioner Kane. I just wanted to help Commissioner Kane. Commissioner Muccici?
I have a question of staff. As soon as Sandy gets through talking about the...
Do you have a question of Mr. McElroy? Well, why don't we go ahead with Mr. Muccici first?
Sandy? The comment that was made was that there are alternatives to achieving the town's wish to restricting that area from having those things happen. What's your comment on that?
The town would still stand that the proposal to have the garden walls be the rear property line is still appropriate.
Because you feel that it can't be controlled, or?
It would result in a more efficient control. Okay. And it would increase the open space. There's already that open space area, and so therefore that open space area would actually increase.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kane, did you still have a question?
I was just thinking about something Mr. McElroy said. You were talking about the road and the inability to put the road closer. Did you say that was a 2-to-1 slope?
Well, if you're going to put the road down there, you're going to have that slope.
What's a 2-to-1 slope degree-wise? 30, 60? Which way does the
1 feet, 2 feet, 1 feet.
2, 1 square root of 3.
What would that be?
45.
45 degrees? You can't put houses there either.
No, that's 45. It's 30, 60.
45, it's 30,
60.
All right, let's, who's answering the question? Let's have one person answer the question. Commissioners, check your mics.
It's not funny.
Who's answering this question? Mr.
It's
Parsons.
roughly 33 degrees, but it's 2 feet horizontal to 1 vertical,
And we have restraints on building houses and riparians over 20 degrees, don't we?
in a hillside zone.
Riparian corridors and hillside zones.
That's why you don't want to put the street there, because you're creating that. And it doesn't have it right now, but you'd have to create that in order to have a road that's, you can use it. If you want to be able to get from the road to the lot, you know, you have to raise the road up, because the lot's up there. That's with your design. I mean, we looked at that design, when we looked at 10 other designs. Been there, done that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions of Mr. McElroy at this time, or ever? This is it. I
think Commissioner Sayak had that question.
Which question was that?
About by lopping off the back 20 feet, and making an HOA, putting the property line on the garden walls, what does that do to our lot sizes? They're all over 8. They're all, because some of them are 13, some of them are 12, and then you're talking about a 20-foot strip that's 60 foot wide, there's 1,200 feet. They're all still large enough. So we're not being creating something that's, even though it's a PD, we're not making something substandard.
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. McElroy. We're going to close this public hearing, Commissioners, and I'm going to turn it over to you so we can do our work. Do we have any other comments? Okay, fine. We're going to have a break in just a second. But I want to just tell you something before the break, okay? We are going to have a break. My recommendation for discussion, and to keep this discussion focused, Commissioners, is that I've made a list of areas for us to discuss, and I just wanted to tell you what they are now. And if you have something you would like to add or comment on, please do it now. But I would like to do this before we take and then we'll take our break. The goal here is to arrive at a consensus, because as you know, this is a recommendation to Town Council based on the findings and considerations. And we will all have differing questions, and we'll probably have lots of differing issues that we want to comment about, and I ask that you have patience with each other as we go through this list, all right? So here's the list that I suggest. Modifications to this project can be incorporated into this draft PD discussion as well, ordinance as well. So I just suggest that the discussion occur in the following order: that we would look at the environmental review, talking about riparian corridor and setbacks, flooding, and response to any reports, and answering questions of, is the Planning Commission satisfied with the environmental information that has been presented, and is the environmental review adequate? Then we would go into the planned development itself, and we would discuss the density. We would discuss the site plan, which would include the layout of the street and the orientation of homes. And then we would go to reduction in the street width, grading, architectural concepts, and community benefit. And lastly, we would end with the A&S application, which is for the demolition of the existing house. And that recommendation should match any action in the plan development ordinance recommendation. Do I have any comments? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I might add that one could simply make a motion when we come back. There's no requirement that we discuss any or all of those things. Is that correct?
You don't have to. If you have no comment on something, you don't have to. This was a list that was covered in all of the, 6 inches of...
I just wanted to make it clear, it's not an assignment.
No, this is not an assignment or a test. Okay, and with that, I would like to make a motion. I'd like to call for a break right now. I don't think we need a motion. I'll see you back here in about 10 minutes, okay? Or it's 6. What do you want? 6 minutes, okay. Thank you. are you in your no? Okay. All right, we're missing a commissioner. Commissioner Sayoc is on her way. Thank you. And I'm waiting to start the meeting again. Pardon me?
Steve wants to hum some music for us.
Do you? Okay, we will take a few minutes and collect our thoughts. Okay, ladies and gentlemen and commissioners, we're all together again. Just for clarification, this recommendation to council does not need findings and for the recommendation, okay? What we are really doing here tonight is, how do I say it? We're trying to get a consensus about what our recommendations are, and we may not even agree. We don't have to have a consensus. It'd be nice if we did, but we may not even agree. But we'll just go down the line with some of those in those areas. You don't have to comment. And I wanted you to remember that this is the recommendation project that the applicant wants to present to the town council. And so our job really is that we now can have our wish list of, based on the general plan in general, about what we like and don't like about the project. So with that, I'd like to open this up for discussion. Okay, questions of staff as well. Okay, I saw Commissioner, I'll tell you what, I saw Commissioner Sayoc's hand up, and then Commissioner O'Donnell, and then Commissioner...
You always favor the women.
I do not.
It fails.
I do not. Well, I could ask if they would defer to you first. Would that make you happier? Thank you.
I will not defer to Commissioner Ritchie. I just have a quick procedural comment. If you can just clarify on our staff report, page 6, under recommendation, it says a majority vote of the full planning commission is required. Therefore, 4 votes are required to take an action on this matter. Now, but you've also said that we don't need consensus.
I saw that as well, and I have it underlined, so maybe we'll ask Mr. Korb, if this is a recommendation, what is that? How does that work?
Well, what you're trying to do is come up with a recommendation either up or down on the project. If your recommendation is to deny and you have a majority, a clear majority that wants to vote for that, do so, and then if there's a request for a hearing, then council will hear it. If your recommendation is to approve, it'll go automatically to council to approve. If you cannot reach a consensus regarding whether to recommend approval or denial, then if you decide that your consensus is to make a series of recommendations regarding the project, if it were to be approved, then if 4 of you vote to do that, then you can send those recommendations on to council. But again, I stress that you should try to reach either an up or down decision regarding the project.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I just wanted to suggest this, that I'm prepared to make a motion, which I think might advance this, because I have no concept as to whether, the one way to find out whether you've got a consensus is to vote on a motion. And obviously, if we get 4 votes, we have pretty much a consensus. But if the chair feels that we should not make a motion yet, but do something else, I would certainly be guided by that.
Interesting. I was thinking we would talk about it first, since we've not had a chance to do that, and then maybe entertain a motion. But that's a unique way to approach this. I hadn't thought of it. Let me think about that.
Well, we've had this now for a number of hearings,
right.
So we haven't talked. We've asked a lot of questions,
right.
And we've all observed each other's questions and listened to the answers. There is some possibility that we might have a consensus. I don't know. But one way to find out, as I said before, if we can't get 4 votes, we've got the rest of the evening.
Okay, to make the recommendation. That's right. All right. Commissioner Machici?
It's been answered.
All right. Okay, as I guess I'm the deciding, I think I would entertain a motion. Let's see how we go on this.
I'll make the motion then. I'm going to make a motion that we recommend to the council that they make the mitigated negative declaration with the changes most recently suggested, so including those changes which we discussed this evening, that they also make the required findings which are set forth in Exhibit M. We recommend that the town council approve the zone change request, incorporating the preliminary development plan as part of the planned development ordinance, which is Exhibit II, or 2, I guess. Forward the zone change request to the town council, and approve the architectural and site application to demolish the single-family residence subject to the conditions which are set forth in Exhibit Q. That's the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Commissioners, we have a motion to approve the zone change and the demolition.
Just clarification.
Yes, Commissioner Machici.
The motion maker, Commissioner O'Donnell, in the report, it stated 3 areas of recommendation by the staff. Are you suggesting we go with those recommendations?
I am.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kane, would you like to ask the question through me so we can all hear what you're asking?
I'm wondering what recommendations Commissioner Machici's talking about. Are those that recommended?
Commissioner Machici, would you like to?
Look at the staff report on page 5. The staff report on page 5.
Okay.
You'll note under staff comments, there's a number of
I went to
recommendations.
number 3, and I thought it referred to the suggestions made regarding Lot 1.
No.
I
It was
understand what
referring
you're
to
saying
those.
now. It's the
Yeah.
staff comments.
Right.
To the maker of the motion, then, where does that put us on the 3 recommendations regarding Lot 1?
Well, my understanding is that the staff originally had made certain recommendations, which I am incorporating into this motion, and then in addition to those recommendations, so that would include Lot 1, they also came up with 3 additional recommendations, which are paragraph 5 on page 5 of our report this evening. Maybe it's 4, actually. It's 4.
Cool.
So it would include what you're concerned about, but it would also include the 4 new recommendations. Am I missing something?
Could we have a repeat of the motion?
My understanding is that the motion is to recommend to council to make the negative declaration, to approve the project, meaning approve the PD zoning application, to approve it with the most current recommended conditions as recommended by staff, which would include any conditions that the report indicates are disputed by the applicant, to approve the A&S application for demolition of the structures, and to make whatever findings are required regarding the A&S application. That's my understanding of the motion.
Okay, and we can make recommendations. When do we make when do we make the recommendations? How are those heard? Just in this discussion? We could offer them to the maker of the motion, or new ones, yeah.
Sure.
But we would offer them to you, or we would just say, and recommendation of, because we may not agree on these, since we haven't talked about it.
My understanding
How
of
would you like
procedure
to
at the
do it?
moment is we have a motion. If
Right.
someone would like to amend the motion, we typically say, would the maker of the motion adopt this modification? And obviously the maker does, and the seconder does. It happens. If it doesn't, we have to vote straight up or down without the modification. So is there another question there?
Okay, right, because I was wondering how we would entertain our recommendations that might be different from another commissioner's.
You do so,
Yes.
if I may,
Yes.
Madam Chair, as Commissioner O'Donnell stated, if you wish to recommend something different than what is currently contained in the motion, then you ask the maker of the motion if they would entertain that change.
I understand that.
If you wish to add any additional comments for consideration by council on top of whatever action is taken on the motion, you can do that as well, but that's separate from the motion.
Correct.
Right, I understand that. I'm just wondering if that is how we want to do this, if that's going to, if the recommendations then would not be accepted by the maker of the motion.
No. Let me make sure it's clear. You have a motion. The motion is, in essence, to approve the applications.
Right.
Or I should say, to recommend to council to approve all the applications. If you wish to modify any of the terms of the approvals, which is what the motion calls for, any of the conditions of approval, any of the design criteria in the PD, any of the factors that would be considered within the motion, then you have to ask the maker of the motion if they're going to accept those changes, including the seconder. If they're not, then the motion doesn't contain those changes.
Right.
And you vote on it, ultimately. And if it's approved, so be it.
That's my point. Commissioner Sayoc and then Commissioner Kane.
Okay, maybe to help expedite this, the motion as it stands, I will not support. And what I could do is I can list out the differences I have versus what is before us. And based on those differences, we can see if there is any room for either the motion and the seconder to incorporate those into the motion. And if not, then at least you know where I stand. So how does that sound for process?
The only thing I would say from
Commissioner O'Donnell?
what you
Well,
just...
wait a minute.
Well, she asked the
Okay,
question.
yes, go ahead.
I'm glad
Commissioner
not to
Kane.
respond to it if
No, no.
Michael wants to respond to it.
No.
But it was a question of what I intended to do, so I
Yes.
thought maybe I...
Yes, you should.
If what you're saying is you have a laundry list of suggestions, which is what it sounds like, I personally would prefer that we vote up or down on the motion. And I'm not wildly optimistic that this will get 4 votes, but we can find out. If indeed it passes, then we don't have to discuss the laundry list. If it doesn't pass, then to get something passed, you might want to make a motion with all of the wrinkles you want to put into it, and then we find out whether we want all those things too. That's my response.
Commissioner Kane?
Classic administrative procedure. That's exactly the way you should be doing it.
Do I then guess at the merit of what her wrinkles might be? Because if I vote yes on this, I'll never hear them. That doesn't make... And I had a wrinkle of my own to the maker of the motion, that on page 3 of Exhibit II, the proposed ordinance, paragraph 1, at the end of the architecture and site approval required, it says the Development Review Committee shall be the deciding body of the architecture and site application. I would ask the maker of the motion to recommend to the author of the document or to council that be revised to the Planning Commission shall be the deciding body on the A&S application. I don't think we've given much attention to A&S, and I'm concerned, for example, with lot number 1. We haven't talked about density, intensity, mass and scale, etc. We've been focused on green matters, and I don't think we've focused on the houses themselves. And in particular, the 3 suggestions that one of the experts made regarding possible alterations to lot number 1. And even on that, I had a 4th for council's consideration. But I don't think we've given due consideration to all the A&S questions. So I'd like to retain jurisdiction on final A&S applications.
I don't personally oppose that. I want to ask staff this question. We have in the past said, notwithstanding the normal procedure, or as suggested here, that it go to the Development Review Committee, we would like to have it come to us, and I understand that that is perfectly fine. And I would be happy to incorporate that into my motion. And if the seconder would support that.
I absolutely support that.
Thank you. I have another question. May I ask one more
Yes,
question?
you may.
Commissioner Sayak, what were your wrinkles? I need to know what they are, Commissioner O'Donnell. How can I not vote for it if I haven't, what?
Minding my own business.
May I find out what those wrinkles are as they made and
I think
make
it's
the
a good
motion
question
even
for you
better
to
than it
ask,
is?
Commissioner Kane. So, Commissioner Sayak?
Okay, just without getting into significant detail, let me just turn to the staff report. Okay. In summary, it's regarding the riparian setback. And we've had significant discussion about what is the appropriate amount of setback that should be set aside. And we've heard the ultimate recommendation of 100 feet. That would be environmental excellence. We've also heard testimony from the regulatory agencies of what they will accept. So, with that being said, I would be comfortable with a 25-foot setback. However, I do have 4 conditions attached to it. The first being that the setback that we have, it be specified so that it is the exact setback that is on Harvey, is it Harvey? Yeah, H.T. Harvey and Associates Enhancement Plan dated September 13, 2007, that combines the 25-foot setback from the top of bank plus the 10-foot setback from the outer drip line of the riparian corridor, and then in areas where there is discrepancy, that we go with the area that is greater. That is actually clearly stated in Figure 2 of H.T. Harvey and Associates. Okay, so that was the first one. The second one was that all of the recommendations in the riparian enhancement plan be incorporated as conditions of approval.
Oh, would you like to go one at a time and ask the...
I'm assuming your wrinkles are meaty, and I was wondering if we could just possibly work with them one at a time.
Okay.
You having stated the first one, what is to make for the motion thing?
Well, but however, before we go through that, we just heard differing opinions on what's the cleanest route to go. I've made it clear that the way it currently stands, I wouldn't accept. And it sounded like people wanted to just see whether or not there was 4 votes right now before we even get into discussion. So, Madam Chair, I want to see how you want to proceed with this.
Right, exactly. And I would say that we're just going to probably see that, and then we'll see where we fly.
Could I just...
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell, and then
Could staff
Commissioner
clarify
Staff.
something, though?
Commissioner Rice.
Your concerns, I want to make sure, are not already, at least so far, covered. So to the extent that you have cited us to a particular H.T. Harvey recommendation, are we not including that recommendation?
The riparian enhancement plan is required, and that is a preliminary plan, and the final plan will be submitted at the time they do the
But
restoration.
then what the commissioner is reading from is something that is included
That is
already
correct.
in the motion.
That is correct.
So we don't need that wrinkle then, right?
Well, I'm listing out the 4 conditions for my approval of the 20-foot setback. So,
I'd just like to identify every time you list it, whether we already have it, so we don't have to make
okay,
a mountain
that's
out of a
fine.
molehill.
That's fine. Okay.
No, I'm in favor. That's what I understand.
Okay, the third issue that is not already included, relocation of rear property lines. I agree with that. However, what I don't agree with is stopping it at the 20-foot garden wall. Because if we were to follow that logic of clearly delineating what is riparian habitat and what is land that is property owned that can be developed, we should follow at the very minimum the 25-foot setback to make that delineation. And the garden walls on the plans that I currently have in front of me have that at the 20-foot. So that is one area where I have disagreement with.
We get a clarification from staff on that? I was under the impression that everything was at the 25
Yeah,
feet.
the garden walls are beyond all that. They're beyond the...
25 foot.
Yeah, the buffer and all that. They are outside of that area.
Meaning that it's
So in
greater
other
than
words-
25 or less?
Right, it's greater than 25? Can we probably all would like to see, can we put it on the overhead?
Either is or isn't.
Yeah.
Let's get this answered. And so.
Okay, we're indicating.
Procedural issue, you're requesting that the maker of the motion, for you to be able to support it, revise the location of the rear property line to, and then whatever the answer is, 25 feet.
But to be fair to this request, if indeed it already is more than
Correct,
the 25
and that's what we're going to
feet,
show.
her concern, which is a good one, is satisfied, right? So could we have a staff response? Is it or is it not already 25-foot setback?
Okay. So Commissioner Sayoc was correct. It's the 20-foot, so it would be moving up 5 more feet. So that would incorporate the 25-foot setback in the H.D. Harvey report. So right now, the garden wall's at this area right here, it's at 20 feet. And this right here would be the 25 feet. So we need to move it 5 feet more in this area. Now, not all the garden walls are that way, though. This garden wall is beyond that limit. So it would be along this area right here we're talking about.
And it is correct that the state has said a 10-foot setback is acceptable to them. Do I understand that correctly?
That would be the 10-foot buffer area. That is correct.
So in other words, whereas we have 20 feet now in some places and more than 20 feet in other places, the number is arbitrary. It is our desire. In other words, we could say 100 feet or 80 feet or 70 feet or 16 feet or whatever. The state has said we're okay with 10. Commissioner Sayoc said, well, I'm not. I want 25. So is that your understanding of where we are?
That's correct.
Okay. I would not accept that.
If I could just comment on that, though.
Commissioner Sayoc, yeah.
The 25-foot setback, in my opinion, is not arbitrary. It is from guidance, guidelines, and standards for land use near streams that this commission recommended to council in January, which the council then approved in February, which states that at a minimum it would be a 25-foot setback from the top of bank. So that, at a minimum, is where I'm pulling that number from. In addition, one other wrinkle that I'm going to throw out there, coming from that same document that, again, is a policy that we've all recommended and has been approved, is the site layout. As we've discussed earlier already, the site layout, and I could point to the specific page, but it clearly recommends against backyards, against creeks. And so I cannot support this layout based on the guidelines that we have.
Isn't that a no vote as opposed to an amendment? I mean, that's a killer. That is a deal killer, isn't it? I can't amend this to say, please, I want to approve the project, but I want to put an impossible condition. There is nothing before us which would suggest to us they're doing what you're suggesting. So aren't you saying you just want to vote no?
It is my understanding that at this point we are listing out our concerns, our wrinkles, and so I've done that. And so, when we began this discussion, we could have started with a yes or no vote, and I then said, these are my laundry list. And so I'm airing out my laundry list, and these are issues that are difficult for me to just bypass.
And Commissioner O'Donnell?
I just want to be clear. I'm not at all criticizing. I think those are bona fide and good concerns. However, since I had thought we were asking me as the maker of the motion whether I could incorporate your requested modifications. When I got to the final, I realized it wasn't a modification. And then I realized that maybe this process isn't very helpful. But it does respond to Commissioner Kane's response to find out what your so-called wrinkles are. But they really aren't. There are 3 wrinkles and 1 big wrinkle. So You're not asking me to modify the motion to that. You're really saying, I'm going to vote no, and I respect that.
So my question is, maybe this isn't the best way to do this.
We haven't voted.
No, I know we haven't voted, but we're getting out our thoughts, all right? Commissioner Kane?
I'm not going to support the motion, so maybe we should vote on the thing and see what happens. What Commissioner Sayoc is saying is that the guidelines and standards that we received in January, that the town approved in February, says 25 feet and has an issue with site layout on backups to the creek. And I get crazy about the hillside standards, having corners cut here and corners cut there. And here we have the first issue before us for these new guidelines, and we're going to cut corners.
Just
So
for
maybe we should
clarification,
say,
the garden wall that's located within that 25 feet is not a structure under the guidelines. So that's why the project complies with the guidelines for the 25-foot. The garden wall is not a structure. Structures aren't allowed within the 25 feet, so it complies. Now, if you think that a garden wall shouldn't be within the 25 feet, then you could make that as a condition of approval. But the project does comply with the standards.
Commissioner Kane and then Commissioner O'Donnell.
Commissioner Sayoc also referred to the backyard up against the creek as being within the guidelines and standards. Mr. Lortz, is that also inaccurate, or is it circumstantial?
As with all guidelines and standards, they're on a project-by-project basis. You have an application before you that has backyards adjacent to the creek. You've heard testimony pro and against backyards on creeks. This is the project that the applicant wants to pursue. If you cannot accept this particular project because the rear yard is adjacent to the creek, then you'd recommend denial to the council. But it isn't about whether the standards don't allow backyards to creeks. It is something that is typically not something that we would do, but you got to look at every project on a case-by-case basis. You have a motion before you. In this particular case, you would be accepting, by approving this motion, a rear yard adjacent to the creek. Now, if you're concerned, there was some discussion about concerns about impervious material. If you wanted to have a condition on the rear yards of the lots adjacent to the creek, minimizing the amount of impervious surface that could be installed by the future owners, then you could put a condition on the PD to that effect. So essentially, you're creating a biological buffer zone using backyards. So that's a way to address that issue. So then it's kind of a win-win, as opposed to having a road closer to the creek.
Through the chair?
Okay, Commissioner Kane.
I made a number of presentations of my concern for maintaining the words in the hillside standards and guidelines. And the analogy I want to make is the same thing. I don't want to start compromising a brand-new document coming out of the chutes. However, it also occurs to me that if we approve a PD, we may be allowed to do different things without compromising guideline documents.
Absolutely.
What other, may I
Go ahead, Commissioner Kane.
Did you have other seeming conflicts with the new standards and guidelines? Commissioner Sayoc?
I guess just one note on that PD application is my understanding of plan developments is design excellence. And so my concern is, from what I've just heard, is almost using the PD as a way out of following standards that we normally ask applicants to abide by. So that's my biggest concern right there. So in a way, you've just added another wrinkle to this. But I think those are pretty significant, and so I don't need to add another long list of issues.
But at some point, we'd like to hear what they are. Okay, Commissioner Rice? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell. Thank you.
I just want to say, we've been through this process for quite a while. The applicant has been through it for infinitely longer. This is a very good project. I think we've all been out to the site, we've all looked. If somebody went out there just individually built homes, you would not have a project anything like this project. I think it is a very, very well-designed project. I don't believe it violates any standard that you could violate. And the reason for the PD is yes, to have excellence, but to have flexibility to get the excellence. Now, obviously, reasonable minds can differ, and at the moment, I like to think reasonable minds do differ. But whatever we do tonight, let's go up or down and move it along to the town council, because it is, I think, reaching the point where you can kill the process with our process, and I think that would be most unfortunate.
Through the chair, may I offer
Yes.
something? Whatever, I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell. I think you need to give a recommendation to the council, up or down on this project. If you decide to recommend denial of this project for whatever reason, then I think it would be helpful to the council for them to hear, if the council was to approve this project, what would you like to see different?
And how would that be included in the motion?
So you would recommend denial of the project because, whatever the issues are. But and then you would say, however, if the council decides to approve the project, I would like to see less impervious material on the backyards of the lots adjacent to the creek, or whatever.
Well, what did you, I know we have a motion before us. Commissioner Rice, do you want to comment?
Well, I just have one thing, and I'm intrigued, and if the maker of the motion is open to it, I'd like to pursue limiting the amount of impervious surfaces in the backyards of those homes facing the creek. I'm not sure how we do that. Do you set a percentage of the backyard?
Well, you could probably do it a couple different ways, just simply. One would be for pedestrian circulation only. So that means they could have walkways and whatnot. The other would be by a number. If you were going to use an arbitrary number, I'd use 1,000 square feet. It's 10 by 100. That gives them plenty of room to build a patio or a little walkway or whatever it is. I would prefer for pedestrian circulation, because that really does limit it.
Okay, I'd like to add that if the maker of the motion is agreeable to limit the amount of impervious surfaces, add a condition to limit the amount of impervious surfaces in the backyard of those lots facing the creek to only that which is required for pedestrian circulation.
Perfect. I'd accept that. Or 10 by 100.
So we can, I have a comment, I guess, or something will be built here. I mean, if I think this project is a good project, but I have a lot of issues with it, how can I vote yes with my issues? Because I doubt seriously that the maker of the motion would accept them. So can I add
Then
that at the end I want to make comments? I mean, how do we do that?
Exactly.
So that's what we would do, serious comments, and we don't have to look for a consensus on those comments.
That's correct.
It would be nice to have some consensus, but anyway, so, all right. Commissioner Sayoc?
Clarification on my third wrinkle with regard to the garden walls. Has the maker of the motion and the seconder considered at least moving it back to the 25-foot line?
Unfortunately, this has become a negotiation, and you've given me a deal killer, and now you want to go back and negotiate. And that's just so contrary to my experience over the last 45 years of practicing law that I find it hard to do it. There's no point in negotiating over something where we're going to wind up with a 3-3 vote, particularly when it says, nobody's done this, we have nothing before us, let us design from the dais and reverse this, which means go back to the drawing board, do all new drawings, and come back and bring it here. I think whatever we come up with, the council is going to come up with what they believe is to be the right decision. And if I were the applicant, I'd say, look, if I'm going to lose, I want to lose expeditiously. And if I'm going to win, I want to win expeditiously. This has gone on for all too long. So I would be happy to do that if I thought it made any difference to you. But if what you're telling me is, I don't care what you do, unless you reverse everything, I'm not going along with this, then no, I'm not going to go through a laundry list and say, but there's a deal killer at the end. It doesn't make any sense to me.
If I could comment?
Comment back.
Okay, so, and then, the reason why I asked for the 25-foot setback, well, I'm just going to take a step backwards. When this, I agree with you, and, our apologies to the applicant who has given us complete patience and understanding. But when this was presented to us in July, one of the very first comments that the applicant made was, this is going to be, I wish I had it in front of me, but this is going to be the first environmentally sensitive project in Los Gatos. And I really want to make this happen. And I really want to stand behind it when I say this is going to be an environmentally sensitive project. And so these suggestions that I'm putting forward are suggestions that I feel would make it there. Now, everyone understands that there is one huge deal killer for me, that's the site layout, and I've given the reasons why. I'm abiding by the guidelines and standards. I understand their guidelines, but these are guidelines that I signed off on in January that I'm going to stand by. But I'm also looking for little ways to improve a project that may be going to council, because I may get outvoted, that I can at least say, these little things would at least push it towards the environmentally sensitive project that everyone in this room is hoping for. So,
Commissioner Kane, who else had their hand up? Was it just Commissioner O'Donnell? Oh, Commissioner Michichi did.
Let the unbiased one talk here. You can do it as a comment. I don't understand why you're asking him to amend it. Do it as a comment that you want that wall moved if it gets approved at council. Don't negotiate with him.
Could I also simply respond by saying you've already heard from staff that it doesn't violate the things you tell us you believe to violate. Now, maybe you're right and staff is wrong. Maybe indeed this 4-foot wall is a structure, even though staff says it is not a structure. But there's a possibility that you are wrong. And indeed it is not a structure and therefore doesn't violate. That's what I think. If you have, if you believe it, otherwise I respect that.
Okay, if I may comment on that, my feeling is that, listening to Commissioner Sayoc, her comments are to make the project better. And I think that that's what we do look for in design excellence. I think this is not a deal breaker request or recommendation at all. I think I would agree with it. And in fact, I would ask that those walls, those garden walls, be sensitive to the layout of the land, like I had offered before, with that they're, meander a little bit and look like they've been there for a long time. So I don't think that putting this back 5 feet is a deal breaker for me, and I would agree with her. We are trying to make it better. That's what a plan development is about. So that's where I would stand on that. I would like to shift this, unless somebody wants to comment further. I'd like to remind you that we also need to consider community benefit. We haven't talked about that yet. We're not in the order of my...
Did we vote? I must have missed it.
No, we're not voting yet. But
why not?
Because I'm thinking we need to make a community benefit part of this motion.
So do you want to make a suggestion?
Okay, I would like to ask the maker of the motion if they would consider putting in there that the community benefit will have to be established. I don't think there is one established at the moment. Is there? Staff?
Blossom Hill.
Well, there's the street improvements.
Oh, that's true, the street improvements, but I guess I'm not thinking that is enough. So, pardon me?
No, that's fine. What do you recommend?
I don't have a recommendation at this point. Perhaps it would be to...
Is staff saying that the community benefit is adequate?
We believe it is.
Okay, does anybody else? Commissioner Sayoc?
should I wait until the comment portion, or should I?
If you have an idea.
If you could just explain to me procedurally what we're about to do, because I do have more comments. And so are we taking a yes or no vote, or are you compiling comments on this?
Okay. That's a very good point, and perhaps I am ahead of myself. I forgot that, thank you for clarifying that we have a community benefit. I did forget that, all right. So we can move on.
She wishes to make additional comments.
Okay.
Yeah,
we can take the vote.
Yes.
Let's take the vote and see where we end up. Okay.
Now, remember, you can offer comments after the vote is taken.
Which would be the opposite of if this was a decision. This is a recommendation. So
Correct.
we can do.
You're in a parliamentary setting, if I may, through the chair right now.
Yes, go ahead.
You have a motion, you have a second on the motion. Normally, you have a discussion on the motion before the question is called. There's always some discretion regarding how much discussion to have. You can have additional discussion. It can be in the form of comments, it could be in the form of general concerns, or you can call the question. You have that choice. If the question is called and the motion ends up resulting in a negative vote or a no action vote, then you can have a new motion made, or you can just have some general discussion until you can formulate, somebody is ready to formulate a new motion.
Sure.
Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell.
My only point was, if Commissioner Sack wants to comment on the motion, why she doesn't support it, or anything she wants to, I wasn't trying to suggest she shouldn't do that. But I also understand that some of you, maybe all of us, have other comments we want to make too. And that ought to be done too. But I'm just saying, I would agree with Mr. Korb. We have a motion. If anybody wants to comment on the motion, why they don't like it, what they'd like to amend it, that's great. If we want to discuss things that don't relate to the motion, I think that probably ought to be after we vote. That's my only comment. I'm not trying to restrict your comments at all.
Okay. I'll go ahead and call it. So let me call the question. We're not going. Do you need it repeated, anybody, or should we just call the question right now? Okay, I'll call the motion. The question. The motion for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. No action. Okay.
Now the parliamentary procedure part. Can I explain my nay?
Yes. Yes, Commissioner King.
The reason I voted nay is I'm 90% in favor of the motion, but the motion doesn't underscore concerns that the new guidelines and standards be followed. And I think I need to say something about that. I haven't studied all 9 sections of it. I've studied Section 3 because that was given to me in January. I went online and I looked at Section 6, and my conscience is bothering me that with these new standards and guidelines, I probably should have taken the extra time and studied all 9 sections. Clearly, I would suspect Commissioner Sayoc has. I don't know if anyone else has, but I would confess to council, I've studied 2 sections out of 9, and I'm worried about what else is in there. So as this goes to them with whatever recommendation, my resistance to the existing motion is specific and limited to I want to underscore that the project comply with the new guidelines and standards to the degree that council sees fit.
I would be glad to make that motion and incorporate that by reference, if that would satisfy you.
Let me hear from Commissioner Sayoc.
We make the motion.
Commissioner Rice, do you have a question?
No, I'll let it go. Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just want to point out to the Commission the language of the resolution Council adopted, which in fact adopted the guidelines and standards. They're basically 4 actions that are taken. But the second one is the one that I think is interesting and should be considered. It says it directs that the guidelines and standards for land use near streams be applied to future streamside development in the town of Los Gatos to the extent feasible, provided that single-family homes in residential zones do not require discretionary approval are exempt from the provisions of this guidelines. That second portion, the proviso doesn't apply. But what I thought was, again, interesting is it says, apply it to the extent feasible. That does suggest, at the very least, that when you're considering a proposal, to the extent that the design layout may not necessarily meet all of the guidelines and standards, you apparently, based on what the council has said, have the discretion to decide, is that layout as the most feasible layout? Is it possible to lay the project out differently to meet those standards? But if you think that the project is the most feasible approach to these guidelines possible, which means it may not necessarily meet the letter of all of the guidelines, then at least based on the language of this resolution, it sounds like you wouldn't necessarily be violating the policy of council to adopt these guidelines. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I think everybody can reach their own conclusion about what's feasible or not based on the evidence provided, but you do have some level of discretion there that council has provided.
We did that intentionally because we are an infill community, and we recognized that these pockets of property would be developed at some point, and so we recognized that there are going to be these challenges, and
Have an infill policy.
we have an infill policy, we have general plan policy, we have policies about production of housing stock, we have a lot of policies, and they all work sometimes against each other, and so what you're trying to do is work through a logical infill pattern and look at the context of the neighborhood too. There's an awful lot of homes that are pretty close to the creek in this area.
Okay, commissioners. Commissioner Rice?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to move this forward.
Yes.
And as I listen to Commissioner Kane, I'm not sure what you need to see, to be blunt, to be the fourth vote. I'd love to get that nailed down and then maybe move this forward. And I'm very sympathetic to those that want to make comments. I have a couple of comments as well that I would like to make for when this gets to council, but at the moment it's not getting there.
Right. So I have a question. Could a motion possibly be for approval and then with the following individual recommendations? I mean, would that be stronger for you? Would that be more, would that help for a positive vote if you thought it was more of a recommendation, not a comment?
If you're asking me, because you're looking at me.
I'm asking anybody. I'm trying to figure out what to do here.
I think we have a very workable motion. We're making a recommendation to council.
Right.
If we get a consensus of 4 that recommend this, but they hear a lot of comments about other things that would be nice to have, the 25-foot setback for the wall, I don't personally believe that's necessary because I don't believe it's a structure. And I think if we're within the standards and guidelines, we're within the standards and guidelines. But if the council in its wisdom chooses to say, you know what, Commissioner Sayoc was right, let's move those walls back 5 feet, I'm okay with that. But I want to get them that chance to do it and hear all of our comments. I'm not trying to shirk my responsibilities here, but I got...
Just a minute. Commissioner Rice, if I may comment on what you said, so you're not in agreement with Commissioner Sayoc, and yet what you just said, however, if the council in their wisdom would prefer a 25-foot setback, then you would be in agreement with that. I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
Well...
I mean, you did say that, but you have to put that in the...
If I was sitting on the council and it came to me, I wouldn't be a big deal about a 25-foot setback for the wall. Okay? And that will be part of my comments, except it already is, when it goes to council.
All right. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'm going to make the same motion. However, I'm going to adopt the additional language as suggested by Commissioner Kane. On the basis that he said that's what he needs. And I think it's fine. But I would appreciate it if Commissioner Kane would ask me to make the modification in his own language so that I get it the way you're satisfied with it.
Commissioner Kane, would you like to?
I'll second the motion.
Wait, Commissioner, wait a minute. Let's hear Commissioner Kane first. Thank you, Commissioner Rice.
No, he made the motion. He's
We have to hear it. We have to hear it.
We have to hear it.
I thought you were taking that as an amendment.
No,
I want to
he hasn't made
say
the
it
motion.
again.
Okay, I apologize.
Okay, Commissioner Kane, what was your enlightenment here?
I'm asking that the motion be amended to include that council pay close attention to the new standards and guidelines regarding building activity near streams. I'm not sure we gave it due consideration in our process, and as Commissioner Sayak is pointing out, 25 feet is 25 feet, there's a site layout consideration, et cetera, and it's the analogy to the hillside standards and guidelines, which are pretty sacred to me. Now we've got these brand-new boys, and we may be cutting corners on them because we're not that familiar with them. So I simply want to underscore that council be guided by the guidelines and standards for land use near streams, which is brand new, and that's a heck of a time to start cutting corners on it.
As I understand the request for modification, then, we would request the council, maybe whatever decision they make, would take particular attention, pay particular attention to the guidelines that you have cited. And I would certainly incorporate that into my motion. I would request the secretary to approve it.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So remake it.
we have a motion.
So-
Or do we have a motion?
Well-
Motion and a second, including modification.
If I may?
Yes, Mr. Corbett.
I previously repeated a motion that was made and voted on by the commission, and no action was taken because it was a 3-3 vote. My understanding of the new motion is that it's identical to the last motion with the exception of the additional language added at the request of Commissioner Kane as articulated by Commissioner O'Donnell and as seconded and by Commissioner Rice, and that's the motion.
Yes.
Call the motion.
Okay.
Discussion?
Do we have discussion on this? Commissioner Sayak?
Well, you know how I feel about it. So I just want to make two comments, and they're not new. But the first issue with regard to the wall, the reason why I'm asking for it to be moved to 25 feet is not because it's a structure that violates our guidelines. The intent of the wall is a clear transition between what is riparian habitat and what is for human use. And by having that wall there, it's a clear delineation of what is set aside for the creek and what is set aside for humans. And so by putting it at 25 feet versus the 20 feet, it makes it that much clearer that this is what we agreed was the appropriate setback from the top of the bank. So I just wanted to make that very clear. And the second, as you know, I will be voting against it again. And the reason I feel that the amended motion is not appropriate is because this planning commission has the responsibility to understand these standards and guidelines. And so I don't think it is appropriate for me to punt that to the town council for them to review a project that we should have completely reviewed and understood before we recommended it to them. So I'll leave it at that.
I just want to make
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I want to make it clear that the maker of the motion is not playing football. I'm not punting. I'm very comfortable with this. You've just said you're not raising the issue that it's a structure. Therefore, as far as I'm concerned, you're conceding that it makes the guideline. But you come up with another reason, which is a fine reason, except that the property is owned by the homeowners association. It is not part of anything other than the fact that the deed, you'll have a deed to a homeowner, and you'll have a deed to a homeowners association, and then you'll have the riparian corridor. People have absolute right to go down into that area, which is owned by the homeowners association, which will be maintained by the homeowners. It is a distinction without a difference. But if it makes you feel, better, fine. I think this is a very difficult situation. I think your concerns are very valid. I happen to believe, however, that I am not punting. So as I respect your decision, I would just request that you respect this.
Okay, I will call the question, but I just wanted to clarify, the owners of those houses are not invited into that riparian area, is that correct? I mean, that's not something they can, I thought that was an understanding of riparian areas and why we're putting in the garden wall.
Well, it's still a common area. I mean,
Right.
people, we can walk down to the creek right now. I mean,
Right,
so,
okay.
I mean,
But I thought
if
that
it can't
there was...
be used as, you can't develop it.
Develop it, okay. All right, just so we understood that. Okay, then I'm going to call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we have 5-1. Thank you.
Well, the commission has acted. Its recommendation is for approval of all of the applications contained within this project. These are recommendations to the town council. Because it's a recommended approval, the council will hold a hearing. The hearing will be scheduled probably, well,
It will be noticed.
it will be noticed if, we don't know the exact date right now, but if you have any questions about when it'll be scheduled, please contact the Community Development Department. There will be a report made to the council of the commission's decision. It may be made at the same time or it may be made prior to that.
Okay, now, Commissioners, we will make comments. Okay, I would like us, if we have additional comments,
Anybody who's still interested probably should wait and hear what these additional comments are that I assume that they're going to add to the record.
and now would be the time to do that.
I do have one more comment to make with regard to community benefits. I understand that the homes that will be built there will ultimately be going into the Los Gatos School District, and assuming that families will be buying into those homes and will be riding their bikes to Blossom Hill and Fisher, I do ask that as part of the community benefit, since you will be restriping, that the applicant look into possibly incorporating bike lanes so that there is a safer passage for those kids riding their bikes to Blossom Hill and Fisher, have a safer transit to get there.
And that comment will be forwarded to the council. I do have concerns about bicycles on Blossom Hill Road and lane width and right-of-way.
Okay.
So those will all be addressed by us as we get to the council.
And just to weigh in on that, for some consensus, I would certainly agree with that as well. And thank you for adding to the community benefit. I knew there was something we needed to do. Okay, that would be very good. Does anyone else have any other comments to the council? I have one, and it's about condition number 21. It's minimized visibility. And there were 3 recommendations, or 3 measures shall be required, and it was one of the measures shall be required to minimize the visibility of the proposed house on Lot 1. And I could agree with their number 1 measure, and I could agree with number 2 measure. But I would not support the number 3 measure, which is to offer to plant buffer landscaping on the adjoining property owner's lot to the east, unless they want it, because that's putting the brunt of that burden on a property owner that was there already. And I think that I would definitely recommend either that the town council discuss either 1 or 2. And so that would be one comment I would make to be added forward to the town council. Nothing else? Commissioner Kane?
I'll support the last 2 comments for guidance for council.
Okay. Let's see, do we have anything else? Let me just check here real quickly. I would like to see also, of course, the A&S is coming back to us. Is that correct? That was in that motion? Yes. Okay, thank you. Then I think we are finished. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not appeal rights because this will be, well, I guess they could appeal.
I'll just repeat, no, there is no appeal. Again, this is a recommendation of approval to the town council. A hearing will automatically be scheduled before the town council. It will be a noticed public hearing. Notice will be circulated in the same manner as the original notice for this public hearing before the commission. It probably will take up late November or December before the hearing is scheduled.
Correct.
Please, if you have any questions about when that hearing is being scheduled, contact the Community Development Department.
Okay, Thank you very much, and good luck.
Next item on the agenda.
Okay, next item on the agenda, everyone, is new public hearings, and we have none, and we've already, we have a new other business, though. I bet we have a report from the Community Development Director.
Well, one that I'll just make up right now. Clearly, there's a need for discussion and probably a study session or a retreat with the Planning Commission to discuss these streamside guidelines and standards. You got to understand the context that they were approved in. They were county-wide. They took 3 years to develop. You had Sunnyvale with no streams. You had San Jose with Coyote Valley with huge opportunities for setbacks. And so there was all kinds of compromises made to create a set of standards that work countywide. That's why we have the language in the resolution that says to the extent feasible. We have got to sit down and understand what these were designed to do. I don't think you can expect to apply them the way you do your hillside standards, because hillside standards were designed specifically custom tailored for Los Gatos. The guidelines and standards that were in front of you this evening were county-wide, and so you have all kinds of different things are going on. So I think we need to sit down and kind of talk about that a little bit. But I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell. This is a work in process. We're going to go back in another year and talk to the county collaborative and see how they're being used and see what challenges are coming up. And believe me, there are going to be challenges. We're just the tip of the iceberg. So I think a little study session would be in order.
And I would agree with that, and it could be added into our training program that we have going on. I do think, though, that this was a wonderful opportunity for us to apply those standards. That's right, but to apply those standards to this application. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I could just make a comment to
Commissioner
that.
Sayoc.
I completely agree that we should do a study session. The recommendation I would make for future design, standards, guidelines, whatever, is that these study sessions occur prior to we approving or recommending for town council.
And we would have loved to, but we were almost late in getting them adopted, so we were out of time. The timeline that we were pushed into as they were developed forced us into a situation where we really didn't have an opportunity to go through that kind of analysis, but I agree with you. And so there was a whole lot of other things involved, and we'll share those with you at the study session. But you're absolutely correct. As we develop these newer things, we'll try to build in that timeline for study sessions.
Commissioner King?
Do we have all 9 chapters available for distribution?
Sure.
At least like a full copy. I've only got 2 sections, and the training can come later, but if I could get the copy now in case another case comes up.
We can certainly supply all the paper you ever want to read, but also we'll include a resolution that talks about what section of the big binder of stuff was really adopted by the council.
And by council, you mean?
Meaning?
Our town council?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever's relevant, whatever might be used.
Okay.
241 pages.
Well, not all 240.
I know that, but I'm just saying it is 241 pages. Commissioner Sayoc?
It occurs to me that the residential design guidelines will be coming soon. Will we have a chance to have a study session on that so that we can completely understand it prior
Well,
to having
if you'd
to
like
implement?
that, again, it's one of those things that has been in process for 2 years with members of this planning commission involved. So theoretically, when it comes out of committee, the planning commission has already weighed in, just as the council has.
Okay. So
Now-
perhaps maybe I could set up a one-on-one
Oh,
since I haven't had that
absolutely,
benefit.
please do, and we could go over those. The challenge that we have on the residential design guidelines is that we need them badly. And so the longer we take to kind of set up study sessions and whatnot, the longer we're without them. And so let's have them get in front of you let you take a look at them, and then we'll see if we need a study session or whether one-on-ones or just how you'd like to do this. But they're ready to come out of committee.
They are. Mr. Korb?
Just a quick reminder, you can never fully understand anything that you don't apply in context. No matter what you understand about it, once you apply those guidelines to an application, you will find wrinkles, you will find folds, you will find all sorts of pitfalls in the application of those guidelines.
Writing codes and standards is a work in process.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Okay. Moving on to commission matters, we had on our agenda for last time was to the discussion of the modifications to the staff report, and so we have definitely moved it to our next meeting, and so I'd like to ask our ad hoc committee if they could be prepared to present that, and that would be Commissioner Rice and Commissioner Sayoc and Commissioner Bourgeois, and I can tell him that. But I just wanted to alert you to that. Would that be in agreement to both of you?
Yes. It's fine with me.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, Commissioners, thanks for your work. Oh, Commissioner Michichi.
I understand that we're meeting the members.
Yes.
That's correct.
In the morning at 8 in the morning, 8 to 10.
Is there is someone coming up with an agenda? Or
Yes.
Yes.
Or is it totally?
No. We're working on,
Yes, there'll be an agenda, there'll be a report, there'll be a
you'll be getting a white paper that has everything. We're taking care of it. It'll be finalized very soon, I would say in the next few days. Yeah. Okay, with that, I adjourn this meeting. Good night.